And this records, right?
Yeah, you're live right. You're live right now, actually, and
Oh,
this will be
bam.
saved as well. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, for those who've been looking forward to this, I've been looking forward to this. This is my first live stream. Everything I've done up until now has been pre-recorded. Me and my gang, we meet on Sunday nights, record a podcast, pop it up about a week or two afterwards. First live stream, and this is ridiculous because for my first live stream, I have none other than the man, the myth, the legend. We got Derek Lambert of MythVision in the house. And I just got to let you guys know this is a honor for me. I've been watching, Derek, I've been watching your podcast for the last probably about a good 4 or 5 months now. And then you actually had me on your podcast about a month or so ago. And I was afraid to read the comments because I'm like, I don't know how people received it. I spent one day, I went back and I looked at the comments, and people seem to really have enjoyed that conversation. And
That
yeah,
was
so
deep. We went pretty deep, and there was so much more that
yeah,
we could get into.
it
And
seemed like it seemed like they needed to be a part two or something needed to happen there. But I just have to say I appreciate you. I'm very thankful that you offered me that platform just to share my testimony and to share how I'm journeying through this. One of the things I sign off when I talk to people online is I say journey well, because so many people reach out and say they're in a similar journey. But just allow me to share that journey and then you sharing yours. So I'm appreciative of you. I thank you for that. Um, I got to say to those who are watching, there's probably this sense of, for a lot of people who knew me as Fanatic from the Cross movement, this Christian rapper, there are people who are like, there are probably people who have been wanting me to have a conversation with someone like you. And they're sitting at home like, ooh, hopefully Brady has been all this time pretending to be a non-believer just so he can get Derek in a conversation with Derek. Now he's going to rip the mask off and expose he's still a believer. He just wanted to have
yeah,
a
but
gospel
what would be
conversation.
like, honestly, if that were the case, what did they expect? Like, you're somehow gonna like beat me up in a
Well, I was doing all
conversation?
this just to be able to have a conversation to win you back and
Oh, I
an
see. I see.
apologetic conversation with you. But
Got
I
it. Got
gotta
it.
disappoint some folks. That's not about to happen. There's no mask to rip off. This is a conversation between two former believers, and we have a lot to talk about here.
Right.
So questions in the chat, throw your questions in there. Somebody said, yo, hopefully you'll get a chance to super chat so you can make some money. There'll be no super chats. I have not monetized my channel. I don't have enough subscriptions for that. So you guys, if you want to help out, subscribe, and maybe we'll get there at some point. But
Drop a comment, subscribe, watch the whole thing. If you can't
yeah,
watch it now, keep it open. Everything helps the algorithm. Keep that in mind.
yeah,
Hit
and
the like button.
I'm learning from Derek. So all the tricks of the trade. I'll be learning things like that. So that was a helpful hint. Keep it open even if you're not watching. Good stuff. First of all, I got a list of questions, but I would love to know, because there's some things that I don't know that I would just love to know. MythVision, how'd that name come about?
So the name MythVision came about when I started to take the Bible. And by the way, I wasn't an atheist when I started this channel.
Hmm.
I was more of a theist. I thought
Okay.
in more kind of a pantheistic way, going down that route of flirting with panentheism,
Hmm.
pantheism, deism, like different forms of something's got to be out there, right?
Hmm.
Something has to be behind all of this. And in the process, what happened during my deconversion, which my story really in deconverting, you could take elements of my entire life, right, and say
Hmm.
there are things along the way that kind of you didn't know, you didn't see until you were leaving, till you escaped the cave. And we'll get into Plato's cave here at some
Okay.
point to use the allegory of my life.
Hmm.
Um, but it was when I started to realize that there's no monopoly on understanding the biblical text, understanding what the meaning and interpretation of the text
Hmm.
is. So I was a Christian. You could call
Hmm.
me a Christian. I was a heretical one toward the end because I believed that the second coming of Jesus already happened. But we'll get into that as time goes by. You're gonna see why I did that when we get there.
Yeah.
I mean, bro, I was trying to save the savior. Okay. Like I was doing anything I could to protect God's word. So I started going, oh snap. Like there was these people that I was able to listen to once I was excommunicated from the Presbyterian PCA Reformed Church. I was part of the Reformed Calvinistic camp. And I started to these scholars and people who said, did you know that the story of Samson is an allegory for the sun, moon, and stars? Like it's kind of playing an allegory. The word Samson in Hebrew means little sun. He has 7 locks of hair, which is the 7 days of the week. When you cut off the strength of the sun, the rays of the sun from its light illuminating, it loses its strength, right? You start to kind of read this out, right? I never read the Bible this way. The Bible was like what it said on face value is what it meant. Jonah was swallowed by a fish, great fish, big fish. That is literally what happened. The guy literally goes down into the depths of Sheol, the bottom of the ocean or sea or whatever, and comes back after 3 days. Like it was literal. And then I started going, hold on. Delilah gets paid in silver. And they described it as it's a combat or a love-hate relationship. It's a romantic love-hate relationship between the sun and the moon. And Delilah deceives the moon. Or the Delilah is the moon, sorry, deceives the sun, cutting the hair, the rays off of the sun, which then loses his strength, which is why they gouge his eyes out in the story at the end. So he cannot see anymore, entering the winter solstice and grinding the mill underneath, down below as a prisoner. He's a prisoner grinding mill. So here it is, the winter solstice, the sun loses his strength and eventually he gets his strength back. Coming back out of the winter solstice, probably into the springtime. Like there's another way of interpreting it. Is this absolutely, can you walk away and go 100%, this is the meaning of the Samson story? No, but it was like something happened and clicked in me when I went, hold on, there's another depth to this narrative and it's not literal. And I realized, well, did it even happen? Because if they're painting it this way, like, did she really cut his hair off? Did he really kill 30 men because they figured out the riddle by, coercing his wife? Did he really slew 1,000 men with the jawbone of an ass? Or is this some allegory and metaphor for something else? And that it ruined that framework in which I thought exegesis. And I kept going. And I said, is Adam and Eve like this? Is Jesus like this? And, I got carried away and got really far off into what I would say is the astrotheology. None of this was literally true perception of interpretation. And you kind of learn. You learn as you go and realize, hold on, I need to ground myself and understand experts who know the language, who know the cultural context, when, where, how, when, why, the whole nine, right? And then I started to go, okay, hold on. There is some truth to this, but there's also an issue that we run into. And one of those is we're not supposed to do eisegesis, Brady. We're supposed to do exegesis. This is what we're taught. The problem is this. The gospel authors are doing eisegesis. So once your entire, don't listen to those liberal scholars, don't listen to those people who are doing eisegesis, practice exegesis, you're going to, crash and burn. And the whole bubble explodes. And when it explodes, it's not like, oh, okay, well, you start to question everything. Everything.
This is why the people who don't like to be called fundamentalists, but they actually are, they're biblical literalists. They always say, when you begin to give up on things like inerrancy, it's a slippery slope, because once you do that, you don't know where someone's going to end up. But when you talk about things like this idea of having a monopoly on interpretation, no one has a monopoly on interpretation. Once you saw that, okay, this can be interpreted a different way, you saw that you were starting to go into that mystical, it could be a bunch of things. you had to ground yourself. How does that play into the name MythVision?
This is great. I got so deep into this that I lost the context of the question, but
No, it's
it's
good.
there because I want, and it's so practical. I've been accused of Illuminati. I've been accused of Freemasonry because I've interviewed Freemasons, and I have learned things from Freemasons on the esoteric symbolic side, because they're big about symbolism, conveying meaning and message.
Okay.
But like my original intro and the original conception of MythVision was, I discovered that the Bible has mythology.
Okay.
When you don't know that, and this is the problem, these inerrantists, these infallibility Christians, these literal, the Bible is truly the word of God, and every breath, it's literally every jot and tittle. These men were moved by the Holy Spirit. There is no error. There is no this. They are the ones causing more ex-evangelicals than anybody. They are the ones who are ultimately creating people like me. And
wow.
If it weren't for them, I'm not so sure I'd be where I am today. Let me paint one quick picture to get back to MythVision is this. I want to say this. If I had not gone through the struggle of addiction, the suffering, the pain that I caused myself and my family and others, I would not understand. I would not be who I am today. So while I wish I never caused that harm to people, I'm also grateful that I've learned what I've learned through the pain, through the suffering, through everything that my life has taught me, so that I can actually say, I know what it means to really hurt. I know I can really empathize with the suffering of people. I can empathize with the message, but we'll get into that. Yeah. MythVision is this. I discovered there's mythology in the Bible. And then I started going, well, there's mythology all over the place. Greek mythology, you name it. And I wanted to put my vision, my focus, my eyeballs on that, because there's not a ton of channels out there when I started MythVision that want to focus, put their eyes on the myth. And when I say myth, I mean it, define it how you will. Not literally true, historically, exegetically, not literally true, but a story, a message, a picture trying to convey a truth through the perception of people, in which the people who wrote this text. So I wanted to see this as a story.
Okay.
And I defined myth when I titled this MythVision as a story. And I think we all, as you're going to get into this question, live or want a story. And so, when I read the Bible as a young man too, just one note, I remember getting so vivid into it when I took it serious in high school. I mean, I've read it, but never took it like this. I started reading it in high school when I was struggling with smoking pot in high school. Like I really am an addictive personality. Not everybody's like that, where I got so into stuff that it's hard for me to break the habit and balance my life. But I started getting into the Bible and I read it, and like I was there on the mountain when God gave the stones to Moses. I walked down and I saw the children of Israel worshiping the golden calf. I was there when he formed Adam from the clay. Like I was there. I lived it through the text all the way to the New Testament. And I liked the Old Testament better than I did the New Testament. Just saying.
There's somebody who's ready to stop listening to you right now just for saying that. Okay, so I think I get it. I think I get how the term comes together. You wanted to put your eyes on what was really happening in the text, even when it comes to the myth that was there. You drummed up another question. This is kind of a variation of what I have on my list, but since you said it, I'll ask it now. Do you think there's any part of you that's still open to, if the Bible contains myth, or maybe you would say largely is myth, but myth is simply just trying to communicate a grander truth? Would you say that there's any part of you that's still open to the grander truth that is behind the myth of the Bible? Sort of like what Jordan Peterson is trying to press people to do today.
Right. I totally get the gist too of this question. And so wherever and whatever the story is, if it conveys something that I find as timeless wisdom,
Mm-hmm.
I'm in it. If Iron Man has something great to convey,
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to enjoy the Iron Man.
Okay.
If the Bible has something I would say has some wisdom in it,
Mm-hmm.
some lesson of truth that can be gleaned through the narratives, I'm in it.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm also this, and I am. It's not even a question of if I'm still open. I am open to that,
Okay.
because that's not what the religions surrounding the literature are technically doing often. There are certain groups, esoteric type of groups, that may come up with mystical explanations and interpretations and things like that. And, you know, I've said it in that recent criticism of Jordan Peterson video, was like, I wish everybody interpreted the biblical stuff like this, because we wouldn't have the crap that we see. That's the problem, is when a text is so easily perceived by so many in such a way. Is it not inherently the issue of the text as well? Do we just put the fault on they just don't get it? That's Jordan Peterson is an apologist for the narrative in the texts often. And while there may be some truth to my point of there being a narrative here, it's not conveyed by the general audience this way. I had a conversation recently with a Muslim scholar who's trying to describe the Quran in a historical critical method, saying, in the Quran, scratch later Muslim interpretation, the medieval scholars, the Quran itself does not paint Muhammad as this ruthless, hardcore, going out with a sword to kill everybody. He's very defensive in many things he says. But all the Muslims interpret it later, and they put him in a historical context where he's saying, no, we go and conquer in the name of God and this and that. And history rolls out that way. So the question is it just, let's just blame everyone else and protect the Quran, like the Quran doesn't have anything wrong, and it's just the people interpreting this text? Or is the text somewhat to blame as well, because it gives the opportunity for this kind of interpretation? And look at how far people have taken it. Now, I'd look at the Bible and say there are downright ugly, dated material that we shouldn't try to squeeze juice out of. I use the analogy in the video with Jordan Peterson: make chicken salad out of chicken and I use the vernacular. I don't think there's certain texts that why are you trying to make that say something nice? Go kill every man, woman, and child of the Amalekites. Leave nothing alive. And when he doesn't, King Saul doesn't, God strips him of being king of Israel. Yeah. He didn't kill every single living thing.
Someone says that's just a myth to communicate. I mean, they wouldn't even say myth, but the point of that story is complete obedience.
Right. So if that's the point of the story, we can come up with better analogies to use. We can come up with better mythologies than, and by the way, in this horrible mythology, which isn't literally true, you're going to annihilate a race of people called the Amalekites, tribe of people, if you will. Every man, woman, and child. Spare no living thing. Haram. Kill it all. Destroy it all. And he doesn't get all of that direct. So the analogy is, be not like King Saul. When God tells you to annihilate entire people groups, bad story to use to begin with. Now, if you grew up in a culture where everyone's at war, these large empires, Assyria, Babylon, Persia, Greece, you name it, and they are fighting it out. And you're like this little guy inside of this large empire where they're battling it out, and you need to have a narrative that looks impressive, that can compete with the narratives around of the annihilation of other groups. And I say the same thing on the origins of Islam. You're dealing with a world where Persia and, if you will, Constantinople, or the Roman Empire in the 7th century, are always fighting for 2 full generations. They're to their weakest point. And here you have these Arabians come up, Arabs, and they really take that and run with it. Yeah. Do you blame them? They're living in a time and a place where this is what's going on. Right. My point is, should we bring that to our century? Should we need that to be a lesson so that we then use that analogy? Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Good stuff.
I don't see any reason we can't create other stories. Why are we needing this story? This is another thing. Like,
Yeah.
let's have our own myth, right? Let's make our own lessons. And I think we can.
Yeah. So then let's jump to that then. One of the questions that people will ask is, okay, so if not that, then what? And even as you talked about your story, when you went from being a Christian, can I ask this right now? I feel like I need to warm up to this question because the guys on my podcast, they always tell me I shouldn't care about this, but I do. I know there are people who are wanting to discount whatever Christianity that you or I might have known if we are now no longer identifying as Christian. So you were never a Christian. So I guess I want to, even though you spoke about your deconversion, how would you deal with the person who says, look, Derek, I hear you, but the very fact that you are no longer means you never were. Does it suffice to say that's simply no true Scotsman argument, which is a fallacy, if the thing does not really contain this idea that you can't deconvert? Somebody would go to 1 John 2:19 and say if they left from us, they were never a part of us. What would you say to the person that says that they want to discount your Christianity before you even get into all this, why you deconverted?
Well, this is the hard part. This is the really hard part because they're stuck. They're stuck. And here we are again. Is it just their perception or are they reading a text? Here it goes back to the text. The literature is teaching them. And I say the literature is speaking here. I know that you can get away with interpreting certain things. But when you find a common theme that is found in many cults of Christianity, and I'm going to use the term cult because this is one of the definitions that make up a cult is that they control your thinking and what you ingest or what you are constantly putting information in your mind about how you think about things. They want to control that. The New Testament conveys this idea that they create a circular argument they can't get out of because once you're a believer, if you have the once saved, always saved kind of concept, or in Calvinism, they call it perseverance of the saints. So you were never really regenerate. God's spirit never really dwelled in you. You thought you were, but you were never really regenerate, Derek. And you can delude yourself into believing you are. As many, like a recent Calvinist I'm going to be interviewing as well. He was a Calvinist apologist online on YouTube who recently deconverted from Christianity. He's still a theist, but he's getting the exact thing you're bringing up. And I do think it's a no true Scotsman fallacy, but I also want to say it's very difficult to explain to someone like that when their entire foundation is built off of this idea. They can't think outside the box. Let me give you I'm going to bring up my presentation here for just a second because I think this is very important. All right, I'm sharing it now.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to go through the whole thing. I literally threw this together like 20 minutes before we actually started. So this is my little something I'll probably put together for this upcoming conference I'm going to be in. Better Than Christianity. You are the key. And of course, by me, here's Jesus. And this is what I'd like to do just to show you, right? We're looking at literature, and here Jesus is talking, I did not come to bring peace. People love going to the words of Christ to get their message, right? He is the Son of God, God in the flesh, according to Orthodox Christians, which make up a majority. But beneath this, right, I did not come to bring peace. He talks about enmity between family members, which look at the Jehovah's Witnesses, right? You gotta literally cast out and get rid of family members who aren't in the faith. This is part of they're more true to the text than most Christians are. But he talks about taking up the cross and following him. Now, the early church understood, and many of them differed, depending on if they liked the idea of martyrdom or not, actually going and dying for their faith. Literally, it says, whoever finds their life, this life, will lose it. And whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. I literally believe the opposite of that now. The opposite of that. You are amazing. You are outstanding. You need to value what you have here. This comes up in a time where slavery in the empire, I mean, like you're talking, this message really spoke to people who weren't on the upper echelon of things. That's why you see gospel messages change over time to kind of not tell you to go and sell everything you own and come follow me. There are rich people who enter the Christian movement, and that theology has to adjust, which is what's so flexible and why Christianity survived, is it literally becomes malleable to any circumstance, environment. In fact, Christianity is like the perfect kind of virus that actually evolves to its environment, and it'll adjust itself. Oh, hold on, the Muslims are coming. You know what? Just war theory. We got to kill these sons of guns. God actually is on our side, and they find a way to improvise and make it so that they can kill so that they aren't killed. That's not the message of Jesus. It never was, but it becomes one. So here we are, Plato's cave, the analogy I wanted to get at. This guy in the front on the right side looking up at this little bird symbol, that's a shadow, right? I'm using the allegory of Plato's cave, even though I don't draw his forms idea. His Platonic philosophy leads to the idea of higher forms and such. Yeah. But it's a great allegory to picture. The person who says you were never saved or you're never really a true believer or this and that is the guy over here looking at the wall. He's looking at the shadow, and the text or the preacher or the pastor or the church or whatever is the guy behind you in front of the flame with the fake little bird, this puppet, making him see this and perceive this is the truth. And he grows up, the story goes, his entire life in the cave, believing that that image on the wall is a real bird, and that is what reality is. But as time goes and time tells, he goes, hold on, that's a shadow on the wall? That's the real true philosopher, Plato says. The one who really wants enlightenment, who really is going to discover the truth. It's not this puppet on the wall, this image of a puppet that is through the shadow of this form from the flame. And so I go on to say, look in the mirror, right? Because it's really you and your perception that is what's going to make you reflect what your reality is in the world. It is subjective. And at the end of the day, you only got to change one thing, my dad said. He used to tell me this when I was struggling with addiction. Son, you only have to change one thing. And I'm like, what's that? Everything. And what he meant by that is you need to change you. So my perception of the world radically, my interpretation of that text changed from, if you find this life, you will lose it. But if you lose this life, you will find it by following Christ. It is absolutely the opposite to me. If you find this life, you find yourself, you find your reflection in the mirror, you have found what you needed to find. Not lose this life kind of philosophy.
So there are people right now who, those who know me will say, I cannot believe, they'll refer to me as fanatic because that's how they know me. I cannot believe that fanatic is sitting there going, as if Derek is saying something deep. They would look at everything you just said and they would see it as very humanistic and very shallow and very, they would say it pales in comparison to the wisdom of God's word. Why am I giving you all these emphatic over here? And I'll just say, anybody who's deconverted from I don't care if it was Jehovah's Witness or Islam or Christianity, when you come to the point that you realize that bird shadow on the wall is so apropos, when I realize, oh, damn, what I'm running around the world calling the words of God has really been written by people just like me. One, I felt like a fool. But at the same time, I said, okay, if not that, then what? And I really had the moment where I had to say, damn, I guess it's on me. I guess it's on me to figure out how I'm going to live. How am I going to trust my senses and my rationality and compute that? And am I even going to trust other people so much that we have these common senses so that I could weigh what I'm calling true and real up against what you're experiencing, and then maybe we can come to something together to figure out what's really going on here. But I said, man, all I have is me, and then all we have is us.
Right.
And it was frightening, but it was freeing because I was no longer tied to these ancient ideas that I was, what'd you say? You were trying to save the Savior, right? You were doing all these things to save the idea of God.
Yeah.
Anyway, the reason why I'm sitting here going, is because I identify with that sense of it's on us.
Right.
And when it comes down to it's on me. If you've not had that experience, listener or viewer, you will not get why I'm even emoting the way that I am.
I want to add to what you're saying here in this analogy. You brought up Plato's cave again, that goes back to the question that you brought up about these people who say you were never really one of us. You were a fake. You were a phony. And it's funny because most of us have been deeper or went into this further, studied harder, did this stuff even more so than the people that are around us. And in this analogy of Plato's cave, I've given a story, but I'm not going to play it here because it has music in it and might ding the YouTube. But there's a row of other people, and they're actually chained in this Plato's cave. They're chained up against the block here that you see the guy sitting in the front looking at the wall, and they can't get up. There is no way for them to go. All they can see is what they perceive. And I want to analogize and say the flame is the biblical text. The pastor, the preacher, whoever, may or may not realize it. They might even believe like you, who's chained up in front, but they are holding up the puppet. I imagine they're chained as well in this analogy, and they don't even realize that they're playing a part of something, giving everybody this perception from the flame that they think, and they're believing the same thing on the wall that then they're help perpetrating. So here's what happens in the analogy. The guy in the front, who is the true philosopher, gets freed. Somehow the chains break off, and he's able to notice that there's a puppet that's reflecting off the wall, and he's realizing, hold on, I thought the wall was the image itself reflecting the shadow was the real thing. So the form that he's holding, this puppet thing, is the reality of the reflection of the wall. This isn't even true. Like this, my perception of all of this has completely fell apart. And he walks out of the cave and he sees the sunlight. For the first time ever in the analogy, he sees the sun shining in the sky. And he goes, oh my goodness, I have been duped. I have literally put all of this time and energy, most of my life, raised to believe that that shadow on the wall was the reality. So he runs back into the cave to the people that are chained up in the front. And he says, listen, that thing on the wall is not true. That thing is a shadow of a puppet and they're going, get out of my face. Stop. Quit. That's true. You are never really truly understanding the truth. That is exactly what these Christians and others are doing. And they have no clue. This is the problem. You almost want to blame them, but you can't because they're trapped. They don't even know how to begin to perceive. I know this sounds pompous. I know this sounds egotistical, but at the end of the day, I don't care because they cannot see what we're seeing. They cannot understand the when we're saying this.
It's maddening because I'm telling you, they're sitting there saying the same thing about you and me.
Bingo, exactly.
These guys cannot see. These guys, they're blinded. The God of this world has blinded them. What do you do? How do you adjudicate the matter when you have two groups of people saying you're blind and you can't see? Now, I would say, I think that we're looking at the world. We have a world that we can verify unless we cannot trust our senses, unless we cannot trust our own minds. We have a verifiable world in front of us where some of us are saying, wait, look at the world. What this text is saying doesn't match the observable world.
Right.
Then you have other people who are saying, but by faith, we walk by faith and not by sight. Is it really the person that's walking by faith that sees more than the person who's saying, trust your eyes? Like, I don't know how else to adjudicate the matter.
I don't go so far to just like act like, oh, trust your eyes. In fact, as I go on, later in this, in the allegory, of course, look in the mirror, only got to change yourself, your perception. I want to get into science, but I'm no scientist myself. I'm studying the scientist, right? I'm learning the scientific method and understanding this. Why this is important to properly trying to assess reality rather than looking at it through an ancient text that is limited in scope. They would say it's unlimited and that it knows everything. And I say perception is key. And using a scientific method is an important way because it's a methodology that you can actually use good, testable, observable things to try and draw conclusions by, rather than going down the path of, well, you need to hate this flesh. You need to hate sex. The end is nigh. Paul says not even act like you're married if you're married. Well, that doesn't work out in Christianity today. Well, I wonder if that's a fossil that we still hold on to in our text. And it is. I want people to read this right here.
Somebody clicked off just thinking what they knew what it was. They clicked off. I can't see that. I can't allow my eyes to see that. This is sin.
but I showed this to my wife earlier, and she's already like, why would you show someone that? I'm like, listen, there's a website, and it gives you illusions. But right here, there's already perceptual tricks in our brain. Our brain does things. It alters the way we perceive things by color and illusions and things like that. And I wanted to just show that your brain automatically tries to adjust the error and the issue here. It tries to fix what is being said here. Here's another one. People think this is actually parallel. Every line that you see here, all of these are parallel. It's the illusion of the perception that makes it look like it's not. Looks like they're going down at angles, but they're not. It's literally parallel. It's an optical illusion to the eye. The same goes for the dots here, right? The dots are actually all the same color. If you look at one dot at a time, they're all kind of peach tan color. But the colors around them make you think they're different color polka dots. Also, this looks like it's waving. It's a still image. This is not a GIF or a video or anything like that. This is a still image. Your perception, it's part of what I'm saying is it's easy to get deluded into perceptions as well. And if you want to get into the philosophy of what Christianity does from Stoicism and Platonism, where it arrives out of, it also is utilizing things from the Mediterranean world, as my research continues to show. I'm just showing more illusions that this literal card in the middle, it goes invisible depending on the color gradients that you're looking at. That circle in the middle does not change size. It looks like it does. That orange one doesn't. The circles on the outside are changing size, which makes the perception of the one in the middle look like it's getting bigger and smaller. It's not. Same goes with this video here. The lines aren't changing sizes. It's literally just the arrow that's changing, the arrow itself. And I wanted to use a couple of these to train. We've seen this one, which direction. If you stare hard enough, it changes direction. Perception. I just wanted to do that. You can stop sharing to give just a teaser as to why perception is important when we get into this. Well, then how do we assess a proper worldview? You need a methodology. And I don't think ancient texts are going to do it. This is their perception. But when you look at Stoicism as it comes to begin from the death of Alexander the Great, the empire is going through chaotic situation. And I want to mention there's a dailystoic.com. If you want to look, there is an overlap between Stoicism and Christianity. As polar opposites people think, but really the belief systems do overlap in several ways. And I've interviewed academics that point this out. But Stoicism, an ancient Greek philosophy formed in Athens, found its following when the Greek world was in chaos. So if you're in a bad situation, I tell this to anti-Semites all the time who try to attack Jews. They go, look in the Zohar, there's anti-Gentile, non-Jewish material that they don't have the spark of life, or that they are hate them, they deserve to die, they shouldn't exist, God kill them all. When you find out what's going on with the Jewish people at this time, I'm not saying what the Jewish people are saying is correct. I'm saying their perception is altered because of the influence of Gentiles treating them a certain way. Let's give it back into some raw stuff in America. Do you want to know why a lot of Black people in America hate white people and vice versa, right? You could see racism. I know this is a raw issue, but I think it's important to point out that what has happened for so long, or is their perception flawed? Sure, but there are some bad people out there. The point is is your environment is going to shape your reality of how you perceive others and the world in which you live. Christianity, which has Stoicism and Platonism built in, or at least Middle Platonism or some form of this in early Christianity, Pauline letters and such, you can see the impact of hating the lower forms, hating the flesh, which is the world we live in. And who is the God of this world? Satan. So the world in which we live in, the flesh, is wicked. It's evil. You need to hate it. If you find this life, you will lose it. You're wanting to go up. You're wanting to ascend to the higher forms. You're wanting to go. And that's what Romans 7 is all about when Paul talks about fighting the flesh. He's speaking to a Gentile audience. And so I want people to understand, if you know where it comes from, you know the puppeteer, you know it's a flame, you see now it's on the wall, it's a reflection. Why would I believe when I've seen, I'm seeing from the perception of the sunlight now. I am not saying I'm omniscient as if I could see it all.
Right.
But I got to start somewhere. And I can see that it's a puppeteer thing on the wall. Does that make sense?
It does. And I guess it brings up the question. So are you saying, even though we can't see it all, at the very least, we should at least trust? Because it almost gets at your own statement there. Should we trust our perception then at all? Are we clueless here? Are we without help here? Because the Christian would say, that's why we need a God, because he sets the standard for what's truth, what's morality, what's goodness, what's other than that, everything is just perception.
You remember the Plato image. I want to paint that picture again in everybody's head. You've got the wall, which is the illusion, the shadow. You've got the guy, prisoner with the wall. He can't see behind the wall. He only thinks the shadow is real. You've got the puppet, and then you got the puppeteer, and then you got the flame where he's using the puppeteer to make the illusion. Christians will say God's word is the flame there, or at least they'll try to say it's the sun, of course. They don't like the analogy because it falls apart in their head. They don't want that to be the case. My point is, they don't realize where the flame got its ideas from. They don't even know that it's not the Bible as your foundation. This is human ethics and human evolution that has been going on for a very long time. I have shown on my channel over and 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 over that the biblical mythology we find in the Bible is not original to the Bible. It is borrowing from other civilizations prior to that. Polytheistic civilizations. We have been learning, and it's like that country song I'm going to use called Life is a Dance. You learn as you go. We're learning as we go. They believe we have the absolute foundation to ethics, morality, perception, truth, you name it. All of this. We have it all biblical. And in fact, we don't only have the foundation, we have the conclusion. They have it all. And it's so easy to buy that message because that's the guy in the cave. It's much harder to be the philosopher who wakes up and wants to wake other people up and creating a world where we're all trying to view the sunlight and recognizing we need a better method. I'm not saying I have all the answers. I'm saying I know damn sure that they don't.
Okay.
You see, and this is what scares people. They want the answer.
Right.
Sometimes we don't have the answers, but we need to meet on common ground as much as we can. Well, let's see. Do we all want to? Who wants to suffer in this world? Who wants to have a horrible life? Nobody raised their hands? All right. So we should probably try to find a world in which all of us can try and reduce suffering. We should try that, right? The reason why Christianity works so well is it's in a position it can't control the world around it. The God of this world controls the world around it. And this is why many people who have been really smart thinkers, elitist in history, say religion is for the masses. It's the opiate of the masses, right? But only certain people can handle the knowledge of recognizing this is mythology. These are stories. They're not literally true. So the elites can say it's not literally true because they're smarter. And everyone in the common people, they need that story and they need to believe it literally to keep civilization and society in order, or else there's chaos. As if we couldn't formulate structures without this story. So
Wow.
it's a very complex matter, but the point
Yeah.
I'm trying to get at is Christianity, dude, these Christians are getting killed. They can't control what's going on. And
Mm,
what if the whole world was educated in seeing the puppet and
mm,
seeing the facade on the door? Can we not all try to find common ground at that point and relate as humans
mm.
and discover human ethics? Try to find ways in which we can better for everyone rather than, man, my life sucks. This world sucks. This flesh sucks. And I can't wait to just get out of here. God, come and destroy this earth. I can't wait for the Lord to come on the clouds, destroy my enemies and save me and torture for all eternity those who did not obey you, depending on the kind of Christianity you have.
Right. Right.
Notice that a lot of trend is trying to get away from that eternal conscious torment.
Well, there's a lot of Christians right now trying to get away from a lot of what the Bible says in terms of taking it literally. You mentioned this back when we first started this podcast. You said what did you say? You said one of the things that is helping people deconvert is how literal people are trying to take the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess one of the questions I would have for you is, had you been introduced to a more liberal version of Christianity? I guess there's a twofold question here. One, do you think you would have bought into it if they told you this was mainly myth from the door? And by myth, even if it was, there's truth wrapped up in here, we just have to figure out what that truth is. Would you have bought in? Do you think it would have had the same kind of power, in terms of calling you to worship? Would you have worshiped the God of the myths? And then two, would you have deconverted once you got to the point where you realize how much of it was myth?
Oh, wow. I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know. And that's something I think more people should start answering questions, like instead of giving answers to. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I know that I wouldn't have been as radical probably because it's such a liberal approach. But then again, I went with a Protestant interpretation. It's all I knew my whole life. And there is some validity. If you go look through history and look at the Protestant Reformation, see what these guys out the gate did, you can understand why they did what they did. The Catholic Church was running off onto all sorts of stuff. And at this point, indulgences are on the scene. So I've heard a lot of even people who are Orthodox, Eastern Orthodox, Roman Catholics say, you didn't try out our version. That's why you got
Exactly.
You don't know the truth. You don't know the truth of Christianity. It's this beautiful picture of symbolic and this and that. And it's like, I think that I would hope I wouldn't hold the double standards. I wouldn't hold the special pleading for mine. And I feel like even liberal Christianity tends to still, why are you drawing the ontological conclusion of this one instead of going with other myths, other narratives, other religions? Why this one? Why is this one unique and only this one? And none other ones are unique and they're not true ontologically speaking. So I can't say I would know what I would be or where I would be at this point, but I think it's the radical position I was in and what I believed and reading the biblical text that has allowed me to go so far in the opposite direction. I don't know if the pendulum would have swung as far as where I am today, is my point.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, good stuff. I can identify with that in terms of, I don't know if I would have been as radical. The first verse of the Bible that I read on my own at age 16, Psalm 90, where it talks about God being from everlasting to everlasting. And it made such an impression upon me.
Yeah.
Because what it did was it said, oh, so there's someone who knows how this all started. And if there's someone who knows how this all started, there's someone who knows why this all started. What's the point? And if there's someone who knows that, there's someone who knows where this is all headed.
Right.
And so I went back to Genesis and I said, well, I guess only he was there, so only he would know. I was impressed by the power, the majesty, the omnipotence, the omniscience. Once you take away that from me, I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing here then. I came for the creation story. I stuck around for the salvation story. You take the creation story away from me, I don't know what to do.
Right.
So yeah, I can identify with that. If you make too much of it too mythical. I don't care how you want to explain it, how many kernels of truth you want to wrap up inside the myth. At some point, you have to say, well, then what's really here?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
That's why you can catch Jordan Peterson when he gives his speeches and talks about how the Bible's containing meta narrative that's literally true. It's more true than true. He'll say stuff like that. And you're like, what does that even mean? He literally be like, it's truer than true. And it's, and you're going, what's that even mean that it's truer than true? I think he's just trying to say it has like an eternal lesson rather than it being literally historically true, as if it's literally historical true, then it only matters that this happened at this time in this place in history. And therefore it doesn't have an eternal message that everyone and all mankind can equate or relate to. And that's fine if he wants to draw that conclusion. At the end of the day, he does the same thing with other literature, fictional writing. But he does special plead and bend over backwards to defend the Christian narrative, where I'm like, do you really have to defend this? Or not just the Christian narrative, the biblical corpus as a canon, by the way. He's reading it as a canon, which that's a whole nother can of worms. Yeah. When I have Christian apologists who do response videos, because there's a lot of people who are starting to leave Christianity, a ton. And it is due to scholarship and expertise that is out there being highly available to people through MythVision and other channels. And even not scholarly stuff, but skeptical thinkers that are sharp and witty and know exactly how to deal with this. Prove your case. Like you talked about God is everlasting, everlasting. That's a proposition. Prove it. Show me what makes you believe those words. Can you even begin to prove what you're saying? You can't. So why do you believe that's the case? It's what you've been taught. Hey, Brady, as a child, hey, see that on the wall? You see that flame? Oh yeah, that's the real bird. Those are the real forms. And you're taught this. It's indoctrination. You're not actually, and it's also philosophical. You like to think, because we don't know the answer of where we come from ultimately, why existence is. So you got to fill in those gaps somehow. Therefore, here's our perception. And it's way more complicated than I'm even painting. We won't even have time to get into all this, but it's like we need to start testing what we're saying before we draw these conclusions and be skeptical about the things that we do. I rabbit trailed off, but
all good.
There's so much here.
I want to make sure I get to a few of these questions before I'm gonna try to dig in the chat. If you guys have questions, if you think would be good questions, I know we got some. I was spying in the comments some presuppositional folks in the chat. So I'm just gonna be honest. Presuppositional apologetics is probably the one thing that draws curse words out of my mouth than anything else. It's not because I'm so frustrated that I can't deal with it. When I was in seminary at Westminster Theological Seminary, the home of presuppositional apologetics, I remember getting to a point where I literally felt like this when they were drilling this presuppositional approach. I felt like, oh, so you want me to basically just like lie to people? Like you want me to deceive people? That's what you're trying to get me to do. You want me to be deceptive in my language and in my argumentation. You don't want me to have a fair conversation with people. Right. And I remember being offended that they were teaching me to argue for the faith that way. Yeah. And so when people come at me with that, if I get like super like, just know it's not necessarily you, the presuppositionalist, it's me remembering how they tried to get me to use that method. They're watching the flames on the wall, the shadow on the wall of presuppositionalism. And I remember being a presuppositionalist myself, and you have to start with your conclusion that the biblical text is the truth and that this is correct. And then you have to start with these things. And they love to go back and back and back. And then even when they pretend they're not biblically motivated to try and draw all these conclusions, they want to start God of the gaps assumptions of their starting point is God. And it's really ultimately Christ, and you need to turn to him. But it's a really deceptive model of not engaging the content piece by piece. Like everything you already assume is true, I'm going to pick apart. Let's talk about the text. Let's talk about the literature. Let's talk about the contradictions. Right. Let's talk about when this was written, why this is actually written after the Mesopotamian mythologies, and how we know Genesis is actually responding to the larger Mesopotamian world, reacting to an earlier mythology.
So there's a lot of things that's like, why are you starting with this book as your foundation when you don't even realize that book is human? It is a man-made text, you know, so.
Yeah. Let me see. I'm just going to pick a few of these. Have you mentioned this already? You did mention this, but maybe you could expound on it more. Since you started MythVision, when did you start your channel?
I think like 3.5 years ago or something.
Okay.
Maybe 4.
So you deconverted from Christianity in 2018.
Somewhere in that
Somewhere around there.
It was transitional.
And it started but started your channel in that process.
Right. I wanted to highlight mythologies that aren't highlighted in interpretations that I thought were way better on approaching the text than what I once believed it to be. But before that is when you see me more conservative in my approach, but also becoming heretical according to orthodoxy.
Okay. So then, since you started your channel, have any of your views changed since then? And just give me one or two.
Oh my gosh. Wow. There's so many details and things that have changed from starting it. I believe,
and rope in there if you can, because I think this will help a listener. If your views have changed, if you've had so many views that have changed, why should anyone pay attention? Aren't you just going to keep changing your views?
Right. To and fro in the wind.
Right.
Every doctrine. I got that accusation as a Christian. This is the sad part again. We're back at the text. They're stuck in a loop. They're on a repeat track. If you see someone who's changing their views, like you, me, and other Christians who go from one doctrine to the next doctrine, they're just going to and fro. Why can't you all just be, I hate to say this, why can't you be a pew potato? Just shut up, listen, and don't use your mind. Stop using your mind to be critically assessing Christianity. Honestly, turn off your thinking skills. Turn off, because your mind is corrupted. Your heart is desperately wicked. All of these texts you can find in the Bible that they use, and they've convinced themselves that the illusion on the wall is reality. And this is scary to me. It's a scary place to be, because I thought at one point as a Christian, I was a diehard believer at this time. I thought, what if I'm wrong about my understanding of Christianity? Because there were so many versions of this, interpretations and models and debates within Christianity about what is true Christianity. I need to get to the bottom of what the truest truth about Christianity is, because I started presuppositionally. It is true. Jesus's words are 100% right. I didn't have a way of proving that. I started with this is the truth. God's word is the truth. Jesus spoke the truth and cannot tell a lie, and worked from there. And when I started working from there, my doctrines changed from, speaking in tongues, laying on hands, like, holy cow, we were really into casting out demons, laying on of hands, trying to pray and heal people, non-denominationalism, to getting more into the, I guess you'd say, Orthodox church, where they're not doing all of that dancing around, rolling on the floor type stuff, to grasping what theology is, systematic theology in the writings of different people, from Arminianism to Calvinism, and different Lutheran and his debates with the other reformers and such. And I really didn't even go into the Catholic Church, but I recognized the reformers were correct in scrutinizing their claims of all of these saints that perform miracles and such. So there's all sorts of issues that I already just trusted them on the front of. And these were Catholics, by the way. John Calvin and Martin Luther were Roman Catholics. These aren't, you other worldview. No. These are brethren in the church fighting, trying to reform the church. Anyway, I say that to say, I started to really try to understand and changed my ideas based on this theology. Well, there's predestination. What does that mean? How does that change my God loves everyone and wants everyone to be saved theology? Like, how could he, if he controls all things, as I've read in the text, it seems he does, how could he want everyone to be saved, but doesn't make everyone get saved? And I started asking basic questions like this.
Mm.
As I started MythVision, I went from believing that this is all really, there's another way of interpreting it, but it's still true, and that there is this deity, but God got bigger than Christianity. I started to kind of back up and saw the puppet, but never left the cave, kind of, and was like, okay, God's bigger than this little bubble of Christianity.
Okay. Yes, I said why, but then you answered the question as you were talking. So then how did you get from God's bigger than this little bubble to God with a question mark? No.
I started recognizing comparative mythology, MythVision, right? When you start recognizing there seems to be tropes, people who are born of miraculous births. I'm going to make it very general. Every single one is different, bro. Christians like to go, no, we didn't Xerox copy. No, I'm not saying you did. There are certain zeitgeisty movies out there that try to say everything's Xerox copy to pagan myths and stuff. No, it is absolutely a trope that men are divinely birthed by gods, by the pneuma of God. If you go in Plutarch is writing contemporaneous to the Gospels, by the way. I mean, this is right there in the ballpark where gods and their pneuma, their spirits, or the spirit of the god is what impregnates the woman. Even the Greeks, the Romans, did not like the idea around the turn of the first century of gods impregnating women through sex. That's not universal, but this is something that was happening in the world. I stopped doing this, bro, and I started doing this. Yeah, and when I saw it, I went, maybe, and I'll read the parable. It's worth reading this as I get into some of these parables, because I know this is really important along my journey as to what happened to me. And I think it's worth reading this. It was 6 men of Hindustan, to learning much inclined, who went to see the elephant, though all of them were blind, that each by observation might satisfy the mind. Now notice that word observation. I've been talking about perception and observation and stuff in this poem. The first approached the elephant. Remember, they're all blind, by the way. The first approached the elephant, and happening to fall against his broad and sturdy side, at once began to bawl. Bless me, it seems the elephant is very like a wall. It seems. The second, feeling of his tusk, cried, "Ho, what have we here? So very round and smooth and sharp, to me, 'tis mighty clear. This wonder of an elephant is very like a spear." The third approached the animal, and happening to take the squirming trunk within his hands, thus boldly up and spake. "I see," quote he, "the elephant is very like a snake." The fourth reached out an eager hand and felt about the knee. "What most this wondrous beast is like is mighty plain," quote he. "'Tis clear enough the elephant is very like a tree." The fifth, who chanced to touch the ear, said, "I'm the blindest man, can tell what this resembles most. Deny the fact who he can." It sounds like the debates among religions, by the way. "Deny the fact who can. This marvel of an elephant is very like a fan." The sixth no sooner had begun about the beast to grope, than seizing on the swinging tail that fell within his scope, "I see," quote he, "the elephant is very like a rope." And so these men of Hindustan disputed loud and long, each in his own opinion exceeding stiff and strong, though each was partly in the right, and all were in the wrong. So often theologic wars the disputants, I ween, rail on in utter ignorance of what each other mean, and prate about an elephant not one of them has seen. This, while I was a believer in a bigger God, this poem made me believe the elephant was bigger, and all of these religions were touching the tusk and the tail, and but they were all kind of right, but they were all wrong. And then that last quote reflected on me later. Not one of them has seen.
Wow.
Not one of them has seen.
Wow.
And then I realized that it was us. And I'll give you another parable. It was us. We.
Hold on. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I think people just need to drink that in.
Okay.
Just that idea of, once you get to you ask that question, if there is for the sake of this analogy, the elephant, if there is a God, this God allows this kind of you know, disagreement about what the God is like, and none of them have seen it. Like,
Right.
isn't that just so convenient that a God exists, yet no one has seen it? That sounds strangely like
This is
maybe
the
it
problem
doesn't.
people have according to a book or
Right,
a
right.
corpus of text.
Yeah.
And then there's some text that deny that people have. No one
Mm.
has seen the Father except the Son.
Right,
But Moses says he saw
right.
God face to face, but there's a cloud, right? So he
Yeah.
couldn't see him quite. So there's some texts that actually say that they saw God.
Mm-hmm.
But those are the epiphanies of God. That's not
Or the
really
theophanies,
the
or
theophany. Yes, that's what I
yeah.
meant. It's like
Mm-hmm.
not really God. Isn't that
Mm-hmm.
interesting how that works? Because
mm,
God cannot be
mm.
seen. By the time you get the first century, you have Plato that has already, the Hellenistic world and Plato has rocked the scene, bro. There's
Mm.
not a Jew on planet Earth that isn't thinking Hellenistically in some way. In
Mm.
some way, through the perception, the philosophy in which they're
Yep.
espousing, even the most devout and extreme versions of Judaism,
Yeah.
like the Essenes,
Mm-hmm.
are influenced by the philosophy of the Mediterranean world. And so this is why I brought up Stoicism. This is why I brought up Middle Platonism, and why I ask scholars about the New Testament. This is why they hate the flesh. This is why this world must
Mm.
come to an end. It
Yeah.
all is built into their eschatology. Bro, there's so much. There's so much.
Yeah. Yeah. When you think about that, though, don't you at least have to take your hat off to the New Testament writers for stitching all of this together in a way that sort of, you've got this platypus of a new religion that
Right.
has some of what Judaism was, it has some of what Zoroastrianism was, has some of what Greek was, and Rome, and now you have this. I don't want to, say like it's the greatest religion of all time, but
Mhm.
if I think somebody used the analogy of what is it? Creates a player, right?
Mhm.
You're playing these games and you take this person's height, this person's speed, this person's strength, this person's athleticism, and you create the perfect player. Well, now you've got a faith that looks like, well, it's got something from everyone. So now you don't really need those other ones anymore because you've got this.
Well, it's not the perfect player, but Christians will say that it
Right.
is. I would say it's a hell of a player, and the reason
Mm,
why is because it can mimic the
mm,
interpretation. You can do anything you want if you try hard enough,
mm,
and
mm,
the problem is multiple doctrines that we find as interpretations are all simultaneously in the same corpus. So if you need one saved, I can find it for you. If you can fall away from the faith and actually lose salvation, that Christ cannot be crucified again in Hebrews, I
yeah.
can give it to you. If you're
Mm,
looking for what you want, you can find it. If you're rich and you don't want to really sell everything that you own to
right.
come follow Christ, you just want to be poor in spirit, not in literal, I don't own a lot of stuff, you can find that. If you're wanting to be poor and sell
Mm,
all you own, and you can find anything you want, that's what makes the advantage there. Because the
mm,
earliest Christians could not agree in the text of the Bible. Scratch the second century, getting lost in church fathers who disagree, the heresiologists, it's the wild, wild west. That's
mm.
my problem when Christians go, stop doubting, my friends, come understand what Christianity is. What do you mean Christianity? What is Christianity? You
Mm,
are
yeah.
making a anachronistic perception of a creedal, indoctrinated version of what you think Christianity is, when before that, there was no Christianity. There was people who
Mm,
followed Christ with different versions and doctrines and contradictions and issues that were going on. And yes, it's there in the text. This is
yeah.
what scholars show.
Mm,
So I must emphasize
yeah.
that. I can't tell you how in the early church, there were people saying, stop having sex. The end is near. Paul.
Hmm.
And then read in the pastoral epistles. Guess what it says?
Yeah.
Women
Don't stop.
get saved by
Mm,
having babies.
mm.
Maybe there's a problem here. Like, you need to become a baby making machine to get saved. Paul saying, stop having sex at all. The end is near.
Mm,
Like, what is going on here?
yeah. Uh, I see some people jumping in the chat. I may want to try to get some questions out of them, but I got a few more I need you to speak on.
Whatever you need.
All right. I think this will be interesting, especially in light of what you've been doing with your channel and what you've got coming up. So think about where we are in the world right now, in the history of the world. We are at a place, particularly in the advanced countries like America, Europe, Japan, depending on how or where you go in Japan. It used to be that. So this question has kind of a long setup, but you'll see where I'm going when I get there. It used to be that people were very afraid of, especially in this country, Marxist ideas about the proletariat rising up and pulling down the bourgeoisie, right? The people who control the tools of production, that have all the power. What technology has done in this country is it's given the tools of production to the proletariat, so that no matter what you do, if you drive an Uber, if you want to get involved in the stock market, if you want to be a recording artist, if you want to be a sex worker, like there are all these tools where you don't need the former structure to be able to make a living. And for some people, it's like, oh, that's destroying society. And it's not really destroying society as much as it's causing us to have to reconfigure or restructure. What does it mean to have a job in this kind of a society? In the same way, I look at what's happening with like a channel like yours. It used to be that you used to have to pay thousands upon thousands of dollars in an institution to talk to a scholar, to ask your question to a scholar, or to learn from a scholar. What you've done is you've brought these scholars out of their ivory tower onto YouTube, such that some of them are even giving up semesters of teaching so that they can get their YouTube channel popping, and they could make their content available on YouTube. In the same way that somebody could say, this is the proletariat rising up, society is going to change, the structures are all falling apart. What if someone were to say, by bringing the intelligentsia out of academia and putting them on YouTube, there is no longer academic accountability. There's no longer the rigorous discussion. Now you've just got these YouTube scholars, and no one can kind of check or challenge anything. There's no more consensus. The passersby can just look at a Bart Ehrman, or look at a Richard Carey, or look at and say, oh, I guess he must be legit because Derek had him on his show. Do you think that things are changing in such a way that scholarship doesn't mean what it used to mean because of channels like yours? Or is it for the better or for the worse, I guess is what I'm asking, that the scholars are now on YouTube?
I would. I don't.
I know it's kind of a long question.
I think it is better. I don't know, like with absolute confidence. I think it is better. My hope is to not create a think tank where you must think like me and you must agree with this scholar. I'm trying to also equip, by having scholars on that disagree as well. I don't always have scholars that are in alignment here on. The one thing I don't usually do is have apologists come on. I did that for over a decade of my life. I was in the Norman Geisler camp, and then I eventually went Reformed, of course. But like I did the whole, let me go to combat and try to like prove my religion's true and make argumentations and find a way to make all this work. Now I'm into critical scholarship, which includes people who are both Christian, agnostic, Jewish, you name it, like atheist, all the above. And I hope that the audience is learning critical thinking skills. And this is you could see earlier in this interview, I said, I am hoping that people are wrong when they say religions are for the masses. And like, we need them to believe in these things literally so that we can check society. The people aren't intelligent enough is the assumption. They just aren't smart enough to grasp what is going on in these ivory towers. And if they did, chaos would ensue, and therefore civilization would be out of control. We'd have anarchy, and we wouldn't have a way of keeping control, people being able to be sheeple in the world and just follow orders and do what they're said. Because that's technically what a lot of these people who are walking into the church doing. Oh, Pastor Joe said today that, I believe that if we educate people, and I think that that's the point. We're all ignorant till we aren't. That we can educate people enough where we can form better society, and we aren't necessarily needing these mythologies or these texts. Even some of them aren't mythologies. I'm going to say mythology even in the theological sense. So certain lessons that are taught, that they have to believe in the perception that Paul's teaching in his letters, for example, or Muhammad is saying in the Quran, or whatever it might be. Like, I want people to think outside that box. And religions have it so well packaged, and you can join whatever size fits you and whatever kind of brand you like, and they give you that package. I'm hoping we can educate ourselves and see that these are man-made constructs that we've kind of pushed onto each other. I don't know if I quite answered your question, but to be point blank, I think it is going to be a better outcome in the long run. I don't have statistics. I've heard other people try to talk about this as statistics. I don't have statistics, but this is my hunch that if we knew these things, would you run around then going, well, now that I know that the narrative is really a guy in the first century under a circumstance where he has Middle Platonism and Stoicism influencing his mind, that he hates the lower forms of the world, the God of this world, flesh and such, is actually bad. He can't wait for that to end because he thinks the ending is going to happen sometime in his lifetime or soon. God says soon over and over, but really soon means thousands of years. Like, do we need that? Do we need to believe that in order to like really know our worldview and have a better grasp? Anyway, I can go on.
So that brings up a question that I was going to forego, but now I'll ask it because that's the perfect on-ramp to it. So then, is your goal to deconvert people?
My goal? My goal is to deconvert people from fundamentalism. So I have a mission. I have a mission. I am very biased in my approach, and I say this outright. And I don't think I'm not ashamed of this bias. My bias is there are radicals out there, and I am trying to get people to become less radical and recognize whether it's the particular community that you're part of that's radical. You need to get out of that. I think it's harmful. I think it's bad. I think it poisons. I really do. I'm with Christopher Hitchens on this point. And I do think that in some way, shape, or form, even though we could find positivity, we could find beauty. Earlier in the chat, someone made a point, and they went like, it was kind of implying like, what are you building upon? I am building upon the past, upon giants, upon the Bible, upon other philosophies, because they say without us, you don't have anything. And the funny thing is without the previous pagan civilizations, I'm using pagan to mean other than Christian, other than Jewish. Without them, they'd have nothing too. So they pretend that they have it. If it weren't for those civilizations, you wouldn't have jack. I don't want to hear it because I am absolutely building off of them, and I'm learning.
I need a remix. I need a remix for that. Somebody needs to hear that. You said we wouldn't have anything without Christianity or the Judeo-Christian worldview. You said without the pagan religions that they built on, the Judeo-Christian worldview wouldn't even exist.
Without a doubt,
somebody needs to hear that.
Yeah, you wouldn't have the building blocks that we see.
Yeah.
Does this mean that there isn't something different about them? No.
Right.
But if you go into the pagan world, you'll find differences amongst themselves. Does that mean that Zoroastrianism is so unique that it had no impact from previous civilizations and philosophies and religious views? No. So my point is you needed your daddy, and your daddy needed his daddy, and pretending that it all starts here when we now know that humans have been around well over a couple 100,000 years in the state we are now, same hardware. God shows up 2,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago. If you want to go with the genealogy, 5,000 years ago. Where was he 195,000 years ago, 250,000 years ago? My point is we're evolving. And so are these ideas. And that doesn't mean I'm starting over. That means let's take the meat, eat the meat, spit out the bone, Try to find what's good, find what's not necessary anymore, and move on. And this is I do have an agenda to do that. But I try not to let that agenda influence my interviews as much as possible. When I'm interviewing a scholar on Paul, I literally let the scholars teach you on what Paul is.
Yeah.
I literally let you ask your questions in the Patreon or the PayPal, or you can do it through Super Chat or whatever it might be. You can ask your question. So I'm not filtering your question. You ask your question. But I also am a human who wants his questions answered, and I'm on a journey as well. So there you go.
So you're doing for other people kind of what you're doing this for yourself, almost in the presence of other people.
My dad said you got to change one thing, right? Everything. He also used to tell me this. He used to say, Derek, if you want to change the world, change yourself.
Yeah.
That's a philosophy I live by. And as I've changed myself, and I continue to do so, the world around me, not only my perception, but people tell me, people go, that problem of other minds in philosophy issue?
Yeah.
Well, people go, there's other minds you can't absolutely prove this, right? But they come to me and they go, what you said resonated with me. And I feel so much freedom from what you have brought. You don't even know what you've done. And I try to tell them, actually, I do, because this is how I felt.
Yeah.
I was freed as well.
Oh, I need my sound effects and, amen corners and all that.
Yeah.
Like, I think we've said versions of this throughout this talk, but it's that coming to the light, seeing that light. It's the having your eyes open. It's knowing that, I've been believing ancient men all this time. All those epiphanies, having experienced them, to be honest, it's the same thing that happened to me when I became a Christian. When the weight of my sin was put on me, such that I began to interpret every impulse that could ever cause a negative outcome as, that's proof that I'm a sinner. And then when it was told to me that put me at enmity with God, I was at war with God, and then I was told about a salvation for that problem, I felt a huge relief understanding things that way. And I went around the world trying to give other people that same sense of relief.
Right.
But to get that relief, I've got to give you that burden. I've got to put that sense of sin on you first. That wrong, that thought you had, that I got to prove to you you're a sinner, which is easy to do when you criminalize and demonize natural instincts.
Bingo.
Right? We have instincts that compete within our own selves, like what's in my best interest, and then my interests compete with someone else. It's going to be easy to convince me convince me that I'm a sinner in that state. So I went around giving other people that relief, but I had to put that burden on them. Then I realized that's not true. But in realizing that's not true, well, that's a new kind of relief. And I'm like, people can be relieved of that. And so I'm going around wanting people to experience that, we're just finding out how we are as human beings. That's what these ancient people were doing with their religion. That's what we're still doing today. We're trying to figure out how we work. And as we get that understanding, we share it with people. So the people that would tell Derek will tell me, me on my podcast, we talk about this. A good Christian does not stay silent. A good Christian shares his faith. But a good atheist, they stay silent. Like if you're going to be a good atheist, keep quiet.
Why do you have to talk about this? You should just not talk about this. And it's like, are you kidding me? Like, I know where I came from. I mean, in another sense, I have another narrative, right? I was addicted to Christianity, to Jesus. And I mean that in the real sense, the same things that highlight in your brain when you scan them. In my religious experiences, the same things I had experienced when I was a drug addict and I was addicted to opiates and stuff. And I'm not saying identically the scans are, but it's highlighting very similar things in my brain. And I was addicted to drugs. Can you imagine? And I'm glad I made a recovery channel where I help people by telling them my story and my path. And if you go to my earliest videos, you'll hear me saying amen. And I prayed to the Lord this morning and all of that. If you go to my earliest recovery videos, you'll find it there.
Okay.
But like I started to exit the cocoon and become the butterfly over time. What ended up happening though is I started speaking because that is actually what helped me stay clean.
Mm.
What helped me to stay clean was helping another human being. Like literally just telling the story and hearing how it's impacting people helped me.
Yeah.
And the more it helped them, the more it helped me. The same thing I think is going on here,
Yeah.
where it's like the more I'm helping people, and I do see the messages from people, endless emails that come in all the time and messages under the videos, really helps me. And it helps me more than they realize. And I mean, I probably help them more than than I realize in different ways. So yeah, I don't really know where I was going with this, other than I'm not going to remain silent.
Allow me to tie it in. Is not just not remaining silent that I think is important. This goes back to the question that I sort of didn't ask, but you answered it just in the way that you began. One of the questions I was going to have for you was, or maybe I did ask, I don't even remember at this point. The question was, since our brains are these pattern seek machines. We seek patterns because that's helped us to evolve and stay alive. We need to know why are things happening so that we can predict what might happen that keeps us alive. But then in the course of that, we get interested in the connectivity of these stories that we tell. And then when we can't make sense of things, we make up stories because we need stories. We need to make sense of our world. And so in that, the question was going to be, do you think it's not permissible because we can't stop people, but how do you feel about people making up myths to get along? And then I think I'll add into that. I think if we were to make up a new myth today, it would include all that we know now. Whereas in the ancient world, the myths that they made up included what they thought of the world then. A dome over, the sky, separating waters from waters, and heaven is up there. That's what they thought of the world. And so they made these myths. What myths would we make today? And I think we would make myths today that tie in what you just said. There's something about us that takes into account other people. And when we recognize that helping others, it makes us feel a certain way. Like somebody in the comments is probably going to say, like, then why do good? Why care about morality? Blah, 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 blah. Let's take our cue from what we know about us, from what we know about how our world works. And if we're going to develop new myths, wouldn't we include those things in that myth? Because that seems to be how we operate.
I'm glad that you brought this up, because I want to say something that I hope happens. Whatever we do, whether we make myths or we think whatever we think, this is why I love the scientific method. And I didn't give a crap about it as a Christian. I didn't, because it's the kind of world you come from. Not all Christians are like that, right? I'm trying not to generalize, but it was like, it wasn't really that important to me. My answers were in this book. And whatever you discovered about the world somehow has to be in line or agree with what I believed the worldview was, which was the Bible. I think it's important to say this. I hope in 500 years, couple hundred years, and hope sooner than later, our descendants, our next generations that come, will rip anything negative and bad and find the best way to make a better world to live in for the world in general, not just humans, but animals, anything. Like, I hope that they make us look dumb. Okay. I don't mean that we're dumb, but once we get there, in hindsight 2020, I hope that we get there, is my point. So just like we're dissecting ancient stories and recognizing there's some bad things here we don't need to behave and act like, if we make a myth now, I hope that we're wise enough to make it flexible to where it is, you can adjust and change over time, whatever, but one that humanity can come in and try to find agreement in. I don't know if that's even possible in light of so much division on planet Earth. But I want one more thing and I'll shut up, is this. We got to create mythology. That's cool and all. I hope our descendants change it. I mentioned that. But the difficulty is, if you don't have a fundamentalist message to your mythology, I'm not sure it'll take, especially if they're not believing in it literally. So there's something psychological about giving everyone the answers. I worked at T-Mobile and sold cell phones as a manager there for many years. I had a choice between Samsung and Apple. This is a real statistical thing they did, is they found out that when people have more than one choice, 5, 6, 7, 8 choices between something, they stress out. People psychologically like less. They like you to make the choice for them. And if you give them an Apple phone and you say, hey, we got it in black and white, or if you go, hey, we got a Samsung and it's in black, green, blue, yellow, purple, we got this mode, that mode, people typically like the simpler, easier, you made the decision for me choice. And I imagine that plays a role into, if we developed a philosophy or a religion or a myth or whatever, if it's not, what are you gaining from getting it? Are you not going to go to hell? Are you going to get rewarded with virgins in heaven? Like, what is it that you get, right? So I don't know if it'll stick.
Yeah. And this is part of, we're going to do an episode on this on my podcast, but my guy, Jay Witt, when I was bringing this up to him, he said, the only thing about this is myth only works when people don't know it's a myth. And so we kind of are in this place with this world filled with religions. Or why is it that every people group has a founding myth and has a story and has something that serves that place? Well, and they don't know that it's that way because someone thought we need one of these, but we can't let the people know that it's a myth because then it's not going to work. Somehow, if we're going to help the future generation, we need to sneak in. We need to sneak the myth in a way that they don't know that it's a myth. But like you said, it would need to be flexible to include. That's the thing about the Bible. It hasn't been flexible.
Well, look at it like a narrative.
I
don't want to equate it to the Bible. An ongoing narrative we give ourselves, but use it off of base it off of scientific and observational things. Does anyone I mentioned earlier want to suffer? Raise your hand if everybody wants to have a horrible life. I hope everybody's in agreement and saying amen. We don't want a horrible life. Okay, let's find ethics that make it to where everybody can share this common goal, right? But when you find texts that actually encourage you to take up your cross, to go, die on behalf, to go shove your particular perception down people's throats to the point where you're now a martyr, or you end up getting persecuted because you're out here knocking on doors trying to convert the world, but it's really their fault that you knocked on their door when you're trying to save them from an imaginary place called hell, and they slam the door in your face and say, quit harassing me, okay? Like, we need to find something that isn't going to cause such self-destructive motives. Our flesh is wicked. I fight against the flesh day and night. And I can't wait to put off this ilk. Like, what the heck? I think the opposite now. I enjoy being in this body. You know, it's, I don't know, man.
Yeah. I don't know if anybody in the chat, especially the Christians, I'm sure you think that we're self-deluded, but I can tell you the freedom of not having to please a silent partner in a relationship that is leaving religion. And I know you would say, but he speaks through the word, or if the charismatic would say he speaks by his spirit. The freedom of not having to massage the text to get a message out of it. The autonomy of demanding, like there are people who are in abusive relationships who finally get a backbone and demand the respect that they deserve as a person who has self-determination, and to be able to say to a God, if you want to speak to me, I'm listening, but I'm not going to let someone else speak to me for you. Like, there's freedom, there's strength, there's, I think, full humanity in that. I don't think it's full humanity to give up your life to find it in someone else. And Derek, you were talking about that before we got on. I think that you were making some great points about just what does it mean to find your life in someone else? Like, can you imagine if someone told you you're nothing without them? Like, it's counterintuitive.
It is not I that lives, but Christ who lives in me. Anything good is not me. It's Christ who lives in me, or God, if you will, depending on God's pneuma, or the Spirit of Christ. So you are nothing. Just remember your place. You are a slave to this world, imprisoned in this body of flesh. Wow, that's beautiful. Like, great. No, Derek, it's not beautiful. That's the point. That's the reality we live in. Wow, look at Plato's cave again, right? And you kind of go, damn, if you walk out and see the sunlight and go, man, this is not like I thought the cave perceived. There's so much here, Brady, that I don't even know where to. There's so much to say, actually.
Yeah. So I just want to read this comment I just saw in the chat. It's worth. What would you say to this? Somebody says, C.S. Lewis says, now the story of Christ is simply a true myth. C.S. Lewis had his own understanding of how myths work. A lot of Christians don't really embrace C.S. Lewis for his theology. They embrace him for his fiction. But they said, C.S. Lewis says Christianity is simply a true myth. Then this person says, as a Christian, the idea of myth doesn't scare me. I actually embrace it.
Right.
What would you say to that? Like, would you support embracing this true myth?
Well, no, I don't believe that it's a true myth. I think C.S. Lewis sees the problem just like Justin Martyr saw the problem. And I don't know if he called it a problem so much if it was Justin Martyr who said it was the devil before Christianity, making these other demigods and gods look like Jesus in his story, so that many who were not chosen, so to speak, who did not have the pneuma of Christ, would fall astray, they'd be led astray. Satan tricked them. So Justin Martyr literally quotes saying that these other gods, we know that it's just like them. The thing is, that was Satan tricking these people. You literally have to believe either Satan made these other things up, and it's a common trope you see similar to what we find in Christianity. Not saying that it's copied. You don't need to copy Xerox in order to find something in a culture. Right. It's a common trope. But C.S. Lewis believed this was a true myth. He literally was born of a virgin. He literally died and rose again. But it's such double standard and special pleading to assume that in all of these other figures, it didn't happen with. So I find that it is, again, a presuppositional thing, but it's also, to me, dishonest. It's a dishonest appraisal of history and how we're not analyzing other claims in history, because ours is true, don't you know? I mean, it's the true myth. It walks like a duck, it talks like a duck, it looks and smells like a duck, but they're all illusions. Those aren't real ducks. This is the real duck. And it's like, dude, what? That's I don't understand why you're thinking the way that you're thinking anymore.
So what's the harm, though? But what's the harm in letting someone continue to think that way?
Like I said, when he's saying true myth, C.S. Lewis does not mean in the total mythology sense that we're saying, like as if this is somewhat legend created and surrounding Jesus. Like most of the things that we see Jesus supposedly doing in the Gospels never really happened. I don't think that's what C.S. Lewis is implying when he says this is the true myth. I think he's in a similar sense to evangelicals, but he sees comparative mythology and he has to say, well, this one's the true one. All the other ones aren't really true. Right. That's the thing. Like he's assuming this is really the true one. If you're saying this is esoteric and it's not literally true in the literal sense, and it's just conveying some story about suffering as humans, and we're all going to suffer in this life, that we all have to face death at some point. And, I'm trying to make it through this world, and I read it in some esoteric sense. I don't know. I'd have to pick apart each claim and see how that would work out and the practice behind it to know whether or not it's harmful or not. But
yeah. Get your questions ready in the chat, because we're pushing up on 2 hours. So get your questions ready before we get too much further. I asked you about are you out to deconvert people? I asked you what's the harm in letting people continuing to believe. Is the door
I
closed?
don't stop people. I don't stop people from believing. I don't try to deconvert people to my ontology. I don't care to make people atheist. That is not my agenda, even if that is an outcome that happens, because people see what I'm seeing. And what that is they're like trying to use critical thinking and saying, You need to show me there's a God to begin with. Show me the elephant. Like, give me the evidence for the elephant before I start assuming the elephant's like a fan, the elephant's like a tail, using that analogy. Sorry I had to cut you off, but I had to point this out.
No, it's all good.
I do have an agenda of deconverting people from fundamentalist ideologies, whatever that may be. You can, at the end of the day, say, I think there's something. My wife thinks there's something. She can't make sense of reality to her. She can't. She thinks, why is all this here? She just can't. She needs to believe there's some source. And I don't go.
Well, that was going to be one of the questions I had.
Go ahead. Sorry.
That's one of the questions I have for you is when you put your worldview together, your meta narrative. I know you talked about it being about us and just this, what we can do for one another as human beings and all that. But what do you do with that? When your wife says there's got to be something, you don't have a category for something. Do you have any grander motif in terms of maybe not a God, but a something?
I would say nature itself. I mean, I am fascinated over and over with existence. So if you have to, and this is the problem, I think, baggage with definitions, people always like to use the term God. They need the word God. So if you're stuck and you have to use the word God, Derek, you have a God as well. I guess nature's my God. Existence itself is God. That's it. Which is why when I looked in the mirror after scaling the hills of this religious idea, I saw myself in the mirror and went, it's you. And the reason I said that is we can only think from our brains that we exist in. So it's all perception from our own existence. And to me, if you have to use the word God and you say, Derek, you have to use God some sense, it would be nature and existence and self in that sense, which, by the way, is a microcosm. Self is a microcosm for the macrocosm of humanity and life itself. And I like to expand it beyond humanity.
Wait, you said, say that again. You said self is a...
We make up, like an ant farm, one ant of a community of humans. And my point is we, the self, which is why I need to love myself. I need to love myself so that I can love the rest of the world, the rest of humanity. What I treat myself as is usually going to be a reflection of how I treat others. Usually. That's for me. I can't say this works for everybody, but so if you want to get down to my nitty gritty, I don't know. But I start with a methodology of naturalism because I can actually prove what is and what exists with testing and being able to observe and calculate and such with what we observe around us. Beyond that, you get into metaphysical, where you try to talk about, well, what was before the universe began? Dude, you don't even know that. And in fact, the Bible doesn't talk ex nihilo. So don't pretend the Bible tells you that answer either. You need to chill and try to understand you're just going off of ancient claims because eternal to eternal, God self-existing eternal. Now, if you're trying to describe God as a personal entity like the Bible does, it isn't framing God in some nature sense. God is not a reflection of some natural phenomena. God is a being just like other ancient Near Eastern being. By the way, God had a penis. I'm not going to get lost in all that, but I refer you to this book. If you don't know, you need to read God in his original context in the ancient Near East to understand. Then philosophy hits the fan, and of course, God becomes like unknowable and beyond and just incomprehensible and such. But yeah, there's so many things, man.
Yeah. All right. Wow. Good stuff. I'm sure people will be playing this back. But if you've got any questions for Derek,
they can ask right now if they have anything.
Throw your questions in the chat. I'll chime on. I'll piggyback on Derek, but
Q&A session here.
Yeah, I've watched you interview so many people that I'm like, I want to just give you a platform just to kind of share things that I've had questions about as you interview people. Is there anybody? Well, I got one question I'll ask before I let them chime in. Bart Ehrman or Richard Carrier? Who's right?
About what?
Right. Well, is Jesus historical? Is Jesus
I think
a myth?
Well, this is the problem. One side, I think, is extremely confident that it is the case that he existed, almost like certain. Almost. I mean, it is history, so it's probabilistic, but I think he might be going too far on the confidence level there. And Richard, I think, isn't. He's super smart, but I just don't think he's seeing why it's so simple to see that there was a guy who gets mythologized. But then again, I know he would say, no, I'm telling you my perception. Every one of these people have an answer to your critique.
Yeah.
Between the two, I think Bart Ehrman's more correct on there being a historical Jesus.
What was it that so I quote Richard Carrier in my book, and I don't know if Vocab Malone is still in the chat. He popped in. Vocab seized on me quoting Richard Carrier, like, oh, Brady was influenced by a mythicist. I only quoted Richard Carrier to demonstrate just how far some people can go with what we have in the text. Like the phenomena in the text kind of leaves it so like this guy could really be a myth. That's one extreme. Right. Then on the other extreme, you have the literalist fundamentalist view. Then you got everything in between. But you've got a whole series of interviews you've done with Richard Carrier. Therefore, you must agree with everything he says, right? Of course
no,
you don't.
Not at all. Not at all. And he stayed at my house for a week doing courses. I have academics come and stay with me, and we do courses, online college courses. We make them affordable so that people can get education at an affordable price without having to go to Ivy League schools or go and have to pay, an arm and a leg just to go to college and learn some of this stuff. Right. Because they may not even be trying to draw some, at the end of the day, like, I need this for a career move. No, you are just you're just a normal person who wants to know. Right. Right. No, I totally disagree with him in many ways. And one of them is Jesus was crucified in Paul. He thinks this is a pre-existent angelic figure that is crucified in outer space or in the heavens, right below the moon. Whereas I take it as no, like I'm reading Philo, I read Josephus, I read the Gospels. I see three, really, if you want to count John as a separate, but I think John knows Mark. And anyway, let's just say the Gospels as one source, because it's really, they're using each other here, unless you want to argue for Q. That's a whole different thing. The point is, they're all talking about a guy getting crucified by the Roman Empire. I couple this and I go, crucified. Jews are being crucified. Jews are being crucified. Jews are being crucified. Paul says he's a Jew. Christ is a Jew. And Paul says he was crucified. To me, Occam's razor says this is simple. Here's a guy who got crucified. Explaining the theology and the legend and all of that, it's another thing. But you can explain it on a historical guide, just like you can explain it, of course, from a mythical angle. So you can have both agree on that stuff is legend or mythology or not really true, historically speaking.
Was there one thing in particular that convinced you that to switch from mythicism to historicism?
It wasn't one thing, but if you go back and you ever watch, if you're that bored and you're just such a Derek Lambert MythVision, freak, you can watch and see. I've asked this question of both Richard Carrier and Dr. Price over the years. What did Paul mean by crucifixion? He was crucified. And if you go on the historicity, the way Richard explains it is there's crucified and crucifixion, and this is true, can generically mean various things. A death, you either died and then they place you on a hook, you be killed through the agonizing torture of some hanging on a cross, a wooden stake, a hook, a tree, whatever. There are various ways in explaining this. He takes the comparative mythology route and sees other gods that are staked to a rock, or Inanna, who's hung on a hook after she's dead. He sees that. For me, I'm like right there in this little zeitgeist of New Testament literature. Josephus, Philo, and the Gospels all account for a Jew, a human, gets killed by a Roman by crucifixion. Paul is in this bubble, and he says he was crucified. That, I couldn't swallow the explanations that were being given by Robert Price and Richard Carrier. Whereas Richard goes along with the idea of crucifixion, but he says it happened by demons in outer space, and that Paul, notice, I got to be very careful about my wording here because he is meticulous about what he says here. He says that Paul believed, and the early Christians believed, that Jesus was a celestial angel who a godlike figure, but not quite God, goes down through the 7 layers of heaven to right below the moon, gets crucified by demons in space. He's manufactured in space of the seed of David. He born of a woman, if you will, made of a woman. He's a Jew who's circumcised in outer space, like all of these things. And to me, that's more ad hoc. I don't see the text. It doesn't say that. It simply says he was crucified, buried, and rose again. And to me, in that vein, rather than comparing it to other figures, I see that as the most simple, Occam's razor, less ad hoc, right to the point. And eventually that, along with other things like born of a woman in the Greek there, it can mean manufacture. It can mean he was literally born of a woman of the seed of David under the law. And I just look at things from the Gospels and I go backwards to Paul and I look at it. And as Paula Fredrickson said in an interview, she said, if you find it in Paul and it lines itself up in the Gospels, you got to be cautious even then, but you're not wrong in thinking, why is it going from Paul into the Gospels a similar trajectory if it's not something that goes back to the early Christian community? And that's Jesus was crucified, born of a woman, under the law. He's a Jew who gets circumcised. He's within this kind of milieu. He's apocalyptic. I don't see why we wouldn't have as you got to pretend that Paul was apocalyptic, but Jesus wasn't. I just don't. I can't see it, man. So there's stuff that there's failed apocalyptic prophecies. And these also make me go back to a mundane rabbi Jew of some sort who thinks the end is going to happen soon, who gets mythologized after his death.
Wow. Good stuff. Last question before I let people in the chat ask theirs. 3 books that you wish Christians would read.
3 books that I wish Christians would read. Oh man, that's a good one. There's a lot. Sorry if I'm sounding echoey. I am in an echoey room. I'm trying to think actually. Well, obviously this is the God of the Hebrew Bible. So I think Christians would do really well if they read God and Anatomy. Okay. I love her work. Because it shows you God in his context. His big pecker context. You need to read this. Scholar knows what she's doing, and she's looking at the ancient Near Eastern literature. I also would recommend, and I cannot recommend this enough. I didn't even realize the treasure trove. Dr. Joshua Bowen's book here.
Is that volume 2? Yeah.
Bro, 1 and 2, but he's on 3 right now, working on 3. I can't recommend this enough.
I wanted to quote from that book so much when I was writing my book, but I knew that if my audience saw the title of the book, The Atheist Handbook to the Old Testament, that they would throw it across the room. So I quoted from Dr. Josh, Atheist Handbook. I quoted from it once. Yeah. But by the time you got to that quote, you were so deep into the book, you're probably going to finish. But great volume 1 and volume 2. Great insights, great research from Dr. Joshua Bowen. Yeah.
There's another book. I mean, I could go on and on about books, but since I've done Old Testament, and Christians might go, dude, you keep talking about the Hebrew Bible, you're not, or the Old Testament. What about the New Testament? There's a very simple book, and it's easy to read. You can get through it in like 2.5 hours on Audible. 10 Things Christians Wish Jesus Never Taught by Dr. David Madison. 10 Things Christians Wish Jesus Never Taught. And he goes into, Jesus said some things that you can tell that Christians don't want it to mean what it says. Yeah. Because they just have to make it mean something else. Yeah. Because it's not nice. It's not pretty. And some things show that Jesus failed. Yeah. And we don't want Jesus being wrong. That gets into the part I never got into that I really wish we could have. And that was my journey as a believer.
Well, no, let's, I mean, I got the time. We're not at 2 hours. We're not at 2 hours yet. So go ahead.
Yeah. All right. This is like, to begin explaining why this is important. If you're not a Christian, you probably won't ever care. But if you are a Christian, you'll understand, especially if you're evangelical like I was. The second coming of Jesus is something Christians wait for. And they pray for it to happen. They're waiting for the day to come. they're also probably anxious about trying to convert people because they're worried that if the Lord comes back, it's too late for these people. And I started to study eschatology. First, I kind of studied it, you could say, when I was into it by watching Left Behind. And, I'm not saying that it was accurate. I'm saying we were indulging ourselves in the idea of the second coming and like, what's this all about? So I was going from non-denominational evangelical Christianity into Calvary Chapel and moving from a Calvary Chapel kind of view to a Reformed Calvinist.
Hey man, we've had such a similar experience. I was raised non-denominational, which kind of Pentecostal at the same time, then to Calvary Chapel, and then got into the Reformed Baptist kind of communities. So similar, man.
I would have gone Reformed Baptist, but we didn't have a Reformed Baptist community in Fayetteville, North Carolina. All we had were Presbyterian, Reformed Presbyterian, and it wasn't like a liberal one. It's PCA, which is extremely conservative. We followed the traditions of the Puritans and the Reformers. We studied these men. We learned John Knox and John Calvin, and we studied the men and their we got into their lives. We loved seeing them as examples. And, I even got into the whole baptism. Is it sprinkling or immersion, right? And they make an apologetic to try and keep it as sprinkling instead of immersion. And that's a whole nother carryover from Catholicism that I find. But the pastor was like, what's your eschatology? Have you been studying eschatology? Because I started going to the college to learn and become a pastor myself. I should have said this at the beginning of the video. I was going to become a pastor, by the way, and I went to college and stuff. And so I said, no, I'm just pre-mill dispensational. Like, I don't really know anything else. I really never studied it. So he gave me, they had on the bookshelf, A Case for Amillennialism by Karen. I can't remember her last name. And I read that. I became an amillennialist. I immediately was like, dude, pre-mill dispensationalism is just cartoony, to me. It's not factoring in language. Like, I'm the God of a cattle on 1,000 hills. What about the 1,001 hill? Is God the God of that cattle? Well, yeah, it's just a saying. It's not literal. And we try to take the millenarianism, the 1,000-year reign in Revelation, and not mean 1,000 literal years. It's some other meaning. So I became a millennialist, and then I started to get into R.C. Sproul. He's Reformed, a Calvinist. I studied Gary DeMar, Kenneth Gentry, R.C. Sproul, men who were what was called partial preterism and is post-millennialism. So they were arguing for a post-millennial golden age that was going to happen. And the world was supposed to get better, so to speak, over time, right? This is their kind of argument, which is also why people that are in this camp want to try and be very political. They want to try and control like Christian nationalism and stuff. They want to control the way that their Christianity is going to reign supreme. They want a government, a Christian government. But did you want to comment on that?
Well, it just got me thinking. Over the weekend, I watched the video of Doug Wilson and James White talking about Christian nationalism.
Yep.
And it was sort of scary listening to them talk about what they want to see happen. They had a very mild version of it. They went through evangelism and a move of the Spirit, but they want a Christian nation. But
Doug Wilson was another one. I watched his debate with what's his name? Something Piper.
John Piper?
John Piper and other people on eschatology. There's a video on YouTube, and I think his partial preterism made better sense. But Doug Wilson actually is creating a community where he lives that is implementing this. And in fact, I had a girl who escaped that cult and explained the kind of stuff that they do. And it's pretty ridiculous. But anyway, I was following in this track of eschatology, and what partial preterism, post-millennialism is teaching ultimately is that there are prophecies. Let's make this really simple. There are prophecies in the Bible that Christians say, well, that already happened. That already happened. Did Jesus get born of a virgin? According to Christians in the Gospel of Matthew, that fulfills a prophecy in Isaiah 7. I'm not going to go into the original context is not about Jesus, but the point is, it's like that fulfills a prophecy. So many Christians believe there are things prophecies that have already been fulfilled. But then there are last day prophecies that you find. And many Christians think that that's talking about their future. Today, they think in the future, Jesus is going to come back. He's going to raise the dead, the resurrection of the dead of all the saints and the unrighteous, because he's going to raise everyone, some to everlasting contempt, some to everlasting salvation. But he hasn't raised the dead yet, and the end hasn't happened. In fact, the final judgment, in their estimation, hasn't happened. They're waiting. In fact, everybody who's died has not gone to heaven. This doctrine of Christianity, Christians don't even realize this. Your uncle who passed away, they're not in heaven yet, according to many of the texts. The end has to happen first. Then he's going to take the righteous, take them to heaven. But there were Christians over time that started to reinterpret this, and martyrs got direct access to heaven. In fact, you find this also in the martyrdom doctrines of jihad within Islam as well, where if you fight whatever it is, it may not be aggressive fighting, you might die on behalf of defending yourself, whatever, you go directly to heaven. But that can't happen until the final judgment occurs, where the righteous and the unrighteous. So many Christians don't even realize nobody goes to heaven yet till this all happens.
Somebody right now was saying, but Paul said to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. And I remember being in Bible college and having my professors try to talk about, what that means. Like that means if you die now, your next present moment will be with the Lord, but it's not going to happen immediately. Your next present conscious moment will be in the presence of God. I just remember thinking, like, how do you know that that's what that means? How are we figuring out what's happening after we die from these texts that say so many different things? And then when I heard you lay out that view, you said partial, preterist, post.
Yeah, preterism, past fulfillment. Just think a prophecy that's already fulfilled in the past. Partial means some of these things, some of the prophecies already are fulfilled in that Christian's mind. A preterist is simply someone who believes past fulfillment. And if you're partial, that means some of them are still future, some of them have already been fulfilled. And I started realizing with Mark, Matthew, and Luke, they talk about the destruction of the Jerusalem temple. And this is actually something that is already being written as though it's fulfilled. But look, just to argue that one point, to be absent from the body is to be present from the Lord. What does Paul mean here? What does he ultimately mean here? Does he mean to die here? Because he could. Does he mean like when he once knew a man who went to the third heaven? He didn't die, but he had a mystical experience who was in the third heaven. He's just having some outer body experience. Was it in the body or out of the body? I don't know, Paul says. I'm not sure. How do we know that this means death? It could mean that. You could run to the book of Revelation and say, look at all the saints who were slaughtered in the name of Christ. They are beheaded for the faith. They're under the throne of God crying out, how long, O Lord? Are you going to be one of those people who's like in the presence of the Lord, but haven't been vindicated yet? Because the book of Revelation does not have them in heaven. Like you're not actually there enjoying it. It hasn't happened till the final holy war with the 144,000 come and the end of all death. No more tear, no more suffering, no more night. There's only the light of God and the flowing of everlasting life and water, and you name it, with the imagery of the New Jerusalem that comes down out of heaven. All of that. It hasn't happened yet. They're waiting for it to happen. So this is so. In fact, I go so far, I'm with Elaine Pagels and other academics, that the book of Revelation makes jabs at Paul. They don't agree with Paul. And in fact, he makes some remarks. This author says stuff like, they claim to be Jews but aren't.
That's
and Paul,
aimed at your boy?
It might be. Well, I think the part that aims at Paul is in chapter 2 and 3, when he's writing to the churches, and he says, eating meat sacrificed to idols. Paul explicitly teaches in his letters, you can eat meat sacrificed to idols as long as it's not a stumbling block to your brethren. If you cause a weaker Christian to stumble, that's wrong. But you know that these idols aren't nothing. You already know they're not real, so you can eat the meat sacrificed to idols. Book of Revelation says, is a condemnation to that church. This is a church that eats meat sacrificed to idols. And so there's a jab at another form of Christianity in the corpus of the New Testament.
Interesting.
There's so many things to get lost here. I want to wrap things up to get to this point, though. I saw that Jesus predicted that this stuff was going to happen soon. Book of Revelation opens up. Write these things down, which have been revealed from the Father to an angel that's giving to John on the island of Patmos. Things which must soon, melo in Greek, soon take place. These things are about to happen. Can you imagine if I'm God and I'm speaking to my people to tell a message to somebody, and I said, hey, man, I'm about to be over there, and I'm coming over soon. Would you call me a liar if I don't show up in my lifetime? Or if I don't show up in 40 years? Or would you say, damn, you don't know how to write?
Like, or you don't know what soon means.
You don't know what soon means. And that's exactly what happens in 2 Peter 3. 2 Peter 3 is already addressing the failed coming of Jesus. That he wasn't going to tarry, as James, the epistle of James says. He will not tarry. He will come. He also says it at the end of the book of Revelation. I will not tarry. Behold, I cometh quickly. I'm coming quickly. I'm coming. I'm going to make it there. I'm about to show up. This stuff is about to happen. The whole New Jerusalem and all of that is supposed to happen soon.
Wow.
So guess what I did? I said, Jesus can't be wrong. Remember I said, he is right. Jesus is right no matter what. If he said he's coming back soon, he came back. This is my apologetic when I got to this position. We misunderstood the words and we literalized the words and made him coming back literal, like it was supposed to literally happen. New Jerusalem, literal. No, all of that's allegory. It's a spiritual kingdom, realized eschatology. And I could do that because you find some of that in the New Testament. When you read the Gospel of Thomas, you find this. They asked Jesus in the Gospel of Thomas, which is outside of your canon, heretical literature, when will the resurrection of the dead, the repose of the dead take place? Jesus says, look around. It's already happened. You just can't see it.
Wow.
So they're already trying to spiritualize what was earlier a real expectation from a real Messiah type figure.
Would you put the kingdom of God is in your midst in that category? The kingdom of God it's already come, like it's at hand.
Oh, when I was a full preterist, yes. And even somewhat in the New Testament today, I read that. Yes. The problem is understanding what the kingdom of God and the coming of the kingdom that was supposed to come, what was that supposed to be? Some vague thing that's unfalsifiable, that's just a feeling that the early Christian community says, you're the body of Christ, and we all make up the body, and we're part of the kingdom of God. Like, you can't, like, the way they proved it was through signs and wonders in their movement, which to us, if you go to a charismatic group, you see them laying on of hands, casting out demons, prophesying and stuff. That's exactly what the early Christian community of Paul was doing too. They were doing similar things and convincing themselves through glossolalia, speaking in tongues and things like that. This is how they thought God's presence was among them and things.
Wow.
And even that got abused because he had to condemn them. Stop it. No, you guys aren't doing it right. And that's wild.
That's one of the reasons why I had to go. I could not see myself trying to convince people that these things were true, that these things were going to happen. I couldn't see myself doing all the apologetic acrobatics it would take. When someone asked me, well, then how come this? Well, I couldn't sign up for that mission. And what seminary did was it exposed me to just how much of that was necessary.
Right.
The layperson, you think, oh, I just learned a few apologetic tricks and I'm good. You go to seminary and you realize, no, we got to cover for this. We got to cover for that. We need an explanation for that. I said, nope, not me. I'm not doing that. Questions in the chat. Throw your questions in. I saw a few. Let me go back up. I saw around 558 people were throwing questions in. And I think they're saying some of my broadcast is lagging. So I'm definitely going to let you chief these questions. Hopefully there's some good ones up in there.
Okay.
So KLW, there's no vowels, so I don't know what to say. It's almost like Yahweh. We don't know how to pronounce your name. KLW says, love the convo. Couple questions. Do you still believe in God? Do you agree intelligent beings set it all up?
You're asking
Derek,
me,
what
right?
do you
No,
say?
I don't.
Yeah.
I don't. And I know this is a whole speech, right? Trying to explain where I'm at today, but I am a naturalist. I'm someone who does think that natural phenomena explains the data, even if we find evidence otherwise at the end of the day, or we somehow are able to empirically test that, that's great. But I think that it's perception again as to why we are intelligent amongst ourselves as creatures, we see as other creatures on earth. So it's easy to assume agency of intelligence when we ourselves see ourselves this way. So we're looking at each other. We go, well, how could we be this smart? If you know evolution, this is why I say evolution's a key factor. If you're a theistic evolutionist type of person, you imagine there's this sophisticated mind being creator that like was behind the billions of years of the universe, the 14 point whatever, to get to where we are on this planet, or at least to get to where the very first single-celled organisms start to arise on the scene. And then from there, you have to imagine that God finally shows up 14.6 billion years. Like the point is the narratives and stuff that we have created, we have evolved to this point is my perception. And I think that assuming that there must be a creator that is this intelligent thing, I understand why people would do it. There's order in the universe, or at least we see order, even if there is some chaos as well. We see structure, patterns, things like that, because we're pattern creatures. And assuming that agency is there, I understand the leap, but I'm not going to God of the gaps explanations to explain things when over and over those God of the gaps explanations go extinct. I'll give you an example. It used to be that the volcano was a god. Like it was a god that controlled the volcano and lived in the volcano. All right. And the eruption was the god's anger and wrath toward the community of people who sinned or didn't do what they were supposed to, didn't give them enough sacrifices, whatever it might be, volcano erupts. Now we know that tectonic plates are a thing, and the shift in the Earth's crust causes pressure to cause the eruption of the volcano. Now, the little tribes that were living outside of these volcanoes, they didn't know. They perceived it was God because they did not understand the natural phenomena. Now, you can always push God further back and say, well, God is the thing behind all existence that caused, and that's what God keeps doing. If you notice these arguments, retreating, he lives on mountains, Mount Olympus, Mount Sinai, Mount this, Mount that. All of these mountains gods live on. Gods get pushed further back. Then it's not God's behind that cloud. Literally, God's outside of space and time now. God keeps hiding and playing hide and go seek, and you can't ever find him and test and observe. But the text says he appears, he shows up, he does this, he does that. Where is this? I don't see it. So I don't assume there's a God hiding behind the cloud, outside of space and time, because the people that assumed this to begin with didn't have any way to know how on the basic stuff we now know isn't true to begin with. So the God model doesn't work for me at all anymore. I start with a whole different model. And if we come out on the end that there's an intelligent creator, this is my little take, right? I always use this for my mom and stuff, or anybody who wants to ask me, my family. I imagine that if we did die, and imagine there's this place where we meet this being or mind, I imagine it's laughing, going, you thought I cared about what you ate, what you wore? You think this mighty mind that made all this, gave a crap about the little dumb stuff that you were... What are you... No, welcome back. Do you remember when I sent you there to begin with? Oh, like I'm playing a game in my head, but it's like, this God doesn't give a crap. If it is, I just cannot imagine something that intelligent would come up with such ridiculous, like theological conclusions about everything that we do as humans.
So you answered a question that I hesitated to ask, which was, are there any parts of your particular myth or story that you tell yourself that others would find as, questionable as you now find the Christian scriptures? And just having, I have those little things in my mind where I'm like, what if this is what's really going on? I think we just have to do that kind of thing.
I mean,
and I wouldn't
reality
force
is
anybody to live with mine, just like I'm not going to live with anybody else's, the
right.
Bible included.
I like to have fun. It's like thought experiments. Like,
Mm-hmm.
what if this is all a dream and you wake up and you're really plugged up to like a matrix machine or something? Or
Right.
like, you die and then there's God and he's like, man, that was all just a dream or some like I put you in there and it wasn't even real. It played no impact. I can't imagine how intelligent they want
Mm,
to then paint the deity would give a hoot over what
mm,
day you did or didn't do something, over what you ate, over what you thought or acted upon
mm,
in these respects, because we are nature, like naturally as humans, we do things.
mm,
And blaming this creature, which evolved along with other primates to be what we are today, for doing what it's literally evolved to in the environment it lives in to survive. I
mm,
think that evolution's all about the survival of the species as best as it can. And if it doesn't
mm,
mutate well enough, then it goes extinct. I can't imagine it would give a hoot. And
mm,
this is a guy I would recommend to Christians who want someone who's not like me, who's full blown on the atheist side. If you want to listen to somebody who's not an atheist, who believes in something beyond this, John Dominic Crossan, I just launched the video today on the
mm,
real historical Jesus. This guy
mm,
starts with what I can know, and that's evolution. And
mm,
he's a believer, and he
mm.
identifies as a Christian to some degree, but he
Right.
will tell you like we're not on a path of being a
Mm.
sustainable human race. We're gonna die out and go extinct if we don't change our actions now.
Good stuff. Good stuff. And I know there are Christians in the chat who are saying John Dominic Crossan is no Christian to them
Yes,
because
it's
he's
that.
of how
Yep.
liberal he is and all
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Your mother's favorite says, do you think, I like this question because I get this in my Facebook Messenger a lot. Curious to hear your answer, Derek.
Yeah.
Do you think this is your mother's favorite. She says, do you think there is any validity in some form? Oh, no, I'm sorry. Oh, do you think there's any validity in some of the more mystical belief systems? Like, is manifestation real? Somebody trying to manifest something, or in your opinion, is it just another myth? And do you have any resources for skeptics thinking about those kind of things?
So mystical experiences, I don't think that the experience themselves are invalid, or I think people have real experiences, real mystical experiences. I drive that they're natural phenomena that humans have. If you meditate long enough, if you don't eat food, you fast, if you don't get
Mm,
sleep deprivation, if you ingest certain chemical compounds, sometimes people just have chemical imbalance, right? So they might hear voices or hallucinate. There's actual books that you can read about hallucinations, and these are people who don't ingest anything. They don't have to fast. They don't have to do anything. They have natural hallucinations all the time. My point is, I think the experiences are real experiences. And what I mean by that is there's something really going on naturally with us that causes us to have these experiences, but I wouldn't draw some ontology from them. And then another
mm,
thing is that I got out of your question, I hope I'm answering this correctly, is that it's almost like that law of attraction or positive thinking will change.
mm,
You can tell yourself, and I believe this. This is my story. I tell myself, Derek, you are great. You are good. You are a good person. You do want to help other people. You do. You are getting better. Keep being that person. I'm going to get in shape. I've been telling myself this lately because I haven't been
mm,
working out since COVID. I haven't been to the gym in years. Guess what I've been doing?
mm,
Going to the gym each morning and exercising. I don't physically want to sometimes, but sometimes there's like this psychological motivation there of psyching myself into convincing myself to do it. And so I wonder if we can make ourselves believe in narratives through some
mm.
experience by telling ourselves you're better, and you start to mimic those actions. Does that
Yeah.
require that there's really some platonic form out there that somehow is actually influencing you to do it, or is it just your thinking that's manifesting? Are you
Mm.
are you actually psychologically pushing yourself to be a better person.
Kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy, as it were.
Self-fulfilling. Yes.
Yeah. What's interesting is, and I'm not a Doug Wilson fan. I had one of the guys on my podcast was speaking of him, and so I went to listen to some Doug Wilson stuff. But I actually ended up watching another video of him this weekend debating the Christian apologist, Dr. Michael Brown, about whether or not spiritual gifts were for today. Dr. Michael Brown is all for the charismatic experiences and all that, whereas Doug Wilson is not. He's a cessationist, thinks the gifts ceased. And it was interesting to hear him as a Christian say something very similar to what you just said, Derek, in terms of there being something about the way the world or the universe operates, where it's almost these coincidental things that can happen, but also some sort of, I don't think he used the term law of attraction, but the way he described it was almost like it didn't necessarily even need to include something spiritual. It's just something about the world that's almost like pseudo metaphysical. So even to hear a Christian say something like that, I was like, wow. So not that if I was still a Christian, like I could have been one of those kinds of Christians, because I was for the most part a cessationist by the time I left Christianity. But yeah, so I think you could even be a Christian and have views similar to what Derek just said.
Yeah, you can. Yeah. And I think we could explain it with natural causes and not have to get mystical or think there's some God or being behind it. Our brains are wild, man. And the more you learn about them, from perception to, how we can hallucinate and experiences, and even coincidences and patterns of like, we can psych ourselves out. I mean, we've seen Darren Brown, the mentalist, literally trick people into thinking that they are having some experiences. And I'm not just talking about when he converts an atheist and then tells her afterward how he did it. He literally converts an atheist and then tells her, I made that connection for you, even though I took real things in your life. He does this in other ways too, to find patterns. So he sets up coincidences in people's lives. And by the end, they're freaking out. Like they're living in this illusion of like, the world is this, it's not coincidence. It's set up. It's planned. There's something going on. Or like if you have a deja vu experience, you start thinking, I used to think that was God giving me a snapshot. Like I know the future before it happens. And then I'd be like, yo, I've been here before. Holy crap. I've seen this before. And I thought that's what that was. I didn't know you could turn to scientists who are understanding the brain and realize, did you know your brain has farts? And I mean, like, meaning it has these hiccups where you then start to perceive like, I've been here before. This is reality. It's like
your sense of time and when things are happening, what's happening before what, or something's happening again. Your mind is doing it to you. It's not happening in the external world.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm looking for those causes first.
Yeah.
Before I jump to, well, I felt like this is like evidence that God was showing me that he knows the end from the beginning. And therefore he's just showing me a snapshot, or I'm some prophet or some crazy thing that there's still people today trying to turn people away from taking their schizophrenic medicine to say, hey, embrace the voices because those are spirits. And it's like, dude, you need to go talk to a medical professional about this. Not sit here and run off into, well, I'm going to just embrace the evil and the good angels that are talking to me on a daily basis and not get help. Anyway.
Yeah. So good question. Great answer. I don't know if you want to tackle this one. Did seminary ever help decipher? Well, let me just say this. For people like Derek and myself, a lot of the help that I've had, I won't speak for Derek, I'll speak for me. A lot of the help that I've had deciphering things in scripture came after deconversion or during deconstruction, not during seminary. What seminary did was it tried to put band-aids over, here's how we can explain this and still give God glory. When I was no longer concerned about giving God glory, I was able to embrace much more plausible explanations for things. So I don't know how this answer will go to this question, but the question is, did seminary ever help you decipher the story of Jephthah?
No.
You know the story?
They no. In fact, I think they didn't go into this story where I was at, and it wasn't seminary. It was a Christian college. Seminary would have been after that, so I didn't go into seminary. I actually by then was already relocating, wasn't able to go to the college. I had to use FastFoot to even get the money to go to this college. But no. I know there are Christian apologetics to try and act like Jephthah's daughter didn't get sacrificed, even Jewish apologetics that are trying to paint this as like, no. But that one, when I realized what was going on in the text, was like, whoa, this is pretty heavy stuff. Yeah. What about you? Did you in seminary?
Not in seminary, no. I was going to bring this up earlier. But you talked about this idea of how the New Testament authors are using the Old Testament. I don't know if you're familiar with Greg Beale.
No. Oh, hold on. Yeah. That sounds familiar. Greg Beale.
He wrote a commentary on Revelation. He's kind of a bigwig at Westminster. He was at Wheaton, I think, before Westminster, New Testament scholar, Greek scholar. But he wrote a book on the New Testament authors' use of the Old Testament.
Right.
Trying to justify why they could use it the way that they could use it and why we can't do the same thing. Right. We can't take things out of context the way they did.
That is.
Yeah. Well, that was one of the moments where I remember saying, I can't do this. I can't make excuses for these people. I can't spend my life doing it. But no, with Jephthah, no, I think it was Kip Davies and Dr. Joshua Bowen when they were walking through the child sacrifices in Deuteronomy, and then the way in, I think, Ezekiel tries to kind of re-explain it in a way that doesn't make it look so bad for God.
Right.
But had I not deconverted, I would have still been trying to find ways, like people do in my comments now, how I'm taking it out of context. It wasn't really child sacrifice. It wasn't, when people had to go through with the vows they made to kill what they were going to kill for God, right. Even if it was people, I would have been trying to explain that away. And I don't know how, as a Christian, how did I explain that? I don't know what I used to do.
I mean, you're on the side that's right. You're even the non-presuppositionalists who argue from an evidentialist basis, I find that there's always a presupposition somewhere. If you go far enough in, there's something that starts their epistemological groundwork that causes them to work outward from there. Because, I mean, there's just blatant outright lying, and then there's this like, I have this presuppositional epistemological starting point that I don't realize causes me to have double standards and special pleading and things like that at the end of the day. So we're all kind of in the same boat, but we're not as blunt and ridiculous about it when we were Christians. But man, that story is horrific. And then you see that even child sacrifice was in in the law in Deuteronomy. I believe it is. Maybe it's Leviticus. I can't remember exactly where it was located. Yeah. But I know that many of the serious academics, in fact, the book I recommended earlier, Francesca Stavrakopoulou, who wrote this book, her dissertation was on human sacrifice in not only the biblical narrative, but also the ancient Near Eastern context to kind of get a gist of what, this is like. And that the God of the Bible was absolutely like the other gods out there. Yeah. It's just like in 1,000 years, if we exist, our ethics will evolve, and we'll look back and people will go, I've said this, 2 things that I think that humans will do if we progress and don't destroy ourselves and we grow ethically and evolve and we don't go extinct. 2 things that I'm predicting, and I've said this, we're already kind of seeing this, that is prisons, number 1, are the worst way to rehabilitate a human. Isolation is not key. What do we do with the criminals that are cannibals and serial killers and stuff? That's a whole different question. My point is, a guy down the street gets caught with, an eighth of marijuana or a little drugs or whatever. Like the way that we handle it in our criminal system is ridiculous. And number 2 is eating animals. It's so inherent in our diet. I imagine in 1,000 years from now, not only will we probably not be sustainable, but we will look back and they will go, can you believe they ate meat from real living things? And we're looking at them going, can you believe they sacrificed their firstborn child that was going to be heir to the throne? to this invisible, non-existent deity that they perceived was in the mountains over here. And they killed this child to appease this God's wrath so that he would send crops in the next season. I mean, that is what I think is going to happen.
Okay. Okay. Here's a question for you. And just so people know, we're not running from questions that are coming at unbelief. Somebody says, Enduring Poet says, Derek, when you start with yourself as evidence that you exist, you're begging the question. To prove whether you exist, you can't start from yourself. How do you know that you exist?
What do you mean you can't start from yourself? I mean, Descartes literally says, I think, therefore I am. And I can't prove. All I can do is say, dude, your brain, there's a whole system behind what I'm describing here. But it's like, yes, I think I exist. I'm thinking. I mean, like I'm the one talking and you're hearing me say these things and responding in a message. So there seems to be at least observational, perceptual evidence for me to know that something's going on here right now. And if I don't exist and I'm a brain in a vat 5 minutes ago, let's say everything came into existence and all this memory, this false memory was inserted in my mind, I can't prove that isn't true either. But I'm also not like, this just doesn't work scientifically speaking. We need testable, observable things that make sense. And so the whole thing falls apart to me.
Yeah. Well, to me, to say you can't start from yourself is a nonsensical statement, because what you're saying is you must start from some other point of origin.
You can't. I don't get how
you're you. You are you. You can't start from anywhere but yourself. So unless you're going to grant yourself selfhood and grant other selves selfhood, is no conversation to have. Where else are you going to start from?
And that is a presupposition, right? Yeah. Philosophically speaking, that I'm willing to say. I'm assuming we exist. Right. If we don't, then if this is all just
well, see, I would go another route. I wouldn't even admit, and I know that counter apologists, non-theists and skeptics have granted that to the presuppositionalists. I don't grant it as a presupposition. I grant that as a prerequisite. So I'm not supposing myself. This is the only equipment that I have.
Well, that's why I would say I don't mind saying it's I'm presupposing that I exist based on just experience alone and the way I have experienced and functioned in the world around me and thinking and engaging others and stuff like that. That I take your word that you exist and you're talking to me, and so I'm not going to deny your existence. Someone in the chat might say, I deny all of our existence. Okay, dude, enjoy the acid trip. I mean, like whatever, but at the end of the day, I don't see how that gets us any further.
Yeah. I'm going back down to see if there's any more questions here. I don't see. I don't see. They've been having great conversations in the chat, but I don't see any more questions. I think we're done with the questions, unless you got any more you want to throw in there. If not, we're going to do closing statements here.
I'm sure there's always someone who will comment down below, and I guess there's so much that I didn't get into, but that journey from thinking Jesus had to have come back in 70 AD, which I did not get into the doctrine of 70 AD preterism, which ends up heretical. It got me in trouble at the Presbyterian Church. 5 elders rebuked me and they sat me down and tried to condemn the doctrine and told me you need to stop, because I was talking to other members in the church about it as well. And they were being convinced because they're facing the text. And remember, these Protestants are dealing with the text, right? So they're all about what does Scripture say? And I felt like Martin Luther, in a weird way, nothing in comparison to the kind of persecution he was dealing with Roman Catholic Church. But I felt like the text says this. I'm going to take Jesus's words before the church tells me we're still waiting on him to come back, when he says so himself in the text, if you grant these are the words that Jesus said in the Gospels, that he's coming back soon, or the end is going to be near. These things are going to happen. Some of you standing here will not taste death till you see the kingdom of God coming in power with his angels to repay each man according to their deeds. Matthew 16, 27 through 28, or 26 through 28, something like that. So it's like, there's stuff that had to happen or he failed. And I was a Christian for a while like that. Got kicked out. And I started to investigate the Bible from an angle that didn't require me to read it the way the others told me to read it. And that was my journey, slowly going out. Wow. Yes, I didn't stay in the bubble. This is why you see Christians constantly say, come to our elders, speak to us, let us help keep you in the bubble, keep you from falling away. Call our 1-800-DOUBT machines so you can talk to us, so we can keep you from leaving Christianity. Because if you're left to your own, critical thinking and investigating, you're going to end up leaving. We need to keep you wrapped up in this bubble before you leave. This is my honest take. I think that's going on.
Yeah. Well, you might have just answered a question that Handsome General asked. So he asked, Derek, what is the most harmful aspect of Christianity?
I personally, well, when we say Christianity, here we go again, right? Like we're assuming what it is. Like we know what it is. And you'd have to go down into history and then look and then see. It's hard to say what version we're dealing with. I would say out the gate, it's just the hating of self mentality and this idea of fighting the urges of a natural world. You know, it's even encouraged in some cases to be a eunuch. And as I can only speak from my experience, right? It was the trouble of cognitive dissonance of dealing with, why do I have these natural urges every day as a human who's attracted, who wants to be sexually active, who wants to do these things, and you're beating yourself up. The flesh, it's not just sex, but I'm saying the views of sex. It's so damaging to oneself and how you perceive yourself. It's not I that did any good. You see it in like a doctor just like cuts out cancer from a brain of your loved one, and you go, thank God you answered my prayer. It was the doctor and your loved one who fought to survive the surgery so that they could live on. Show me, where's God in this? What did he do? He's the one who, if anything, if he's sovereign in any way, he gave your family member the cancer because he made the world we live in that causes, oh no, you misunderstand the fall, Derek. Now we're in a whole nother can of worms. So it's just, I would say the view of self is poisonous in Christianity. That's early Christian text and stuff.
So you can't be pro-humanity without being pro-God first and pro a specific God first. Then and only then can you be pro-humanity, and only the humanity that he is in favor of saving. I could see that being damaging. I got a brother who this brother hates everything I think I put out, but he's always in the comments here. Ivy Connolly, I know you've been starving for attention, bro. You finally gonna get some from me. He asked, Derek, what makes you care about your existence if you know upon death you'll never know that you never existed in the first place?
If I know upon death that I never exist, I do think I existed even when I die and I'm no longer around. I do think that I came into existence, and I do think that I existed. But say the question again.
Well, so what makes you care about your existence if you know upon death, at that moment, you'll never know that you ever existed in the first place? So you will have, but you won't know that anymore.
Yeah. So why does it matter? Exactly. It's like saying, look at science, right? And if you listen to a lot of the theoretical physicists, they point out that the universe is going to end in a bang or in a fizzle. They think it's just going to fizzle out and go into cold. Something it's going to end in a bang, and it's going to be cataclysmic. But no matter what, every human, everything that is living in this universe is going to go extinct and stop existing, right? Derek, why would you go make yourself breakfast in the morning? Derek, why would you go make love to your wife? Derek, why would you take care of your kids? I mean, if you know that, why the hell are you caring about this right now? And that is exactly what I hope to teach and educate people who are listening to me today, who think, if there's no God, then what's the point? If there's no God, there's no meaning. There's no purpose. And this is missing the point. You We give meaning. You don't need something outside of this to have meaning. You can have meaning right now, right here with each other. You don't need to think there's an imaginary thing out there. And I use imaginary here because I don't think it's there. You do. So I'm going to suppose, hey, you don't need to think, oh man, good thing there's a God outside space and time, or I'm not going to love my wife. Good thing that God exists outside of space and time, or I'm just not going to eat breakfast today. Because what's the point? I might as well just die now because there's no meaning. I think that this is a great point, an example for people who struggle, who are coming from a theistic world like I did, and I'm glad I landed the plane and didn't crash and burn, who are coming from that all meaning and purpose is grounded in God. Is grounded in God. You have no ethics, you have no morality, you have no meaning, there is no purpose. Therefore, if you don't have that, you don't have those things. And I think this is a perfect place to point out, we believe we have all of those things. And in fact, I find even more meaning to know that this is it. This right now is what I have. Not to pretend and lie to myself or convince myself, even though I wish I'm an atheist. I wish this story went on into another place, into another amazing world where we can spend forever with each other in love and all of these great things. I wish that were the case. I do. But I'm also not psyched out to believing that that's the case. And my meaning must be grounded in that. Or my purpose or my ethics have to be grounded in that. No. I wake up and if I don't eat, I start to hurt physically. If I don't make love to my wife, I'm urging to. I'm fighting something here. Like my point is your existence starts to tell you, hey man, you need to do this to survive. And this gets down into the fundamentals of evolution and stuff too as well. Yeah. Why? It's very complicated. It goes into consciousness. What I think consciousness comes out as a natural phenomenon as well. But there's a lot. There's a lot here in this question.
So Alan Bird, you retyped your question. I appreciate that because I was looking for it. I couldn't find it. But it sounds like Derek just answered the question that you retyped even without having heard it. Would you say, or do you still need me to read this question? The question was, Derek, it took a long time after deconversion to stop asking the existential angst. There must be something more to life than this question. What was that your experience and how did you get over it? And it sounds like you just kind of went into the existential, path. Unless you have anything else to add to that. It seems like you just answered that question already.
I think just to specifically address, it does take a while to start thinking in other ways and it's like mourning a death. Leaving Christianity kind of is like mourning a death. But I think that after a while, those questions, you still ask these questions. They're just not on the forefront of your mind as much. Because you then realize like you don't need God to have meaning or purpose or any of that. You still think, well, I'm going to die one day. And what I leave is what is going to be remembered for me. So I'm going to do my best to leave what I can and try to hopefully leave steering our descendants, if you will, in a good path, in a direction that I think is going to lead us into a better world, so that we can enjoy as much of time as we can in this sunlight as possible. Like that's what I want. I'm an optimist.
Yeah. I hesitate to share some of my myth because I'm not sure how. It seems like I'm coming across clear to you, Derek, but a few people, one person actually said several times that I'm lagging and not coming through clear for people. So, but I try to take my cue from what is. So I think I have a healthy dose of skepticism, existentialism, not nihilism, but taking my cue from what is, I've got to think that there's something, if we've been progressing all this time, that's part of my myth. There's something about progressing and I have a role to play in that. I don't know what happens after this. I know that I'm here now. And I know that we've been progressing, and I think I need to contribute to that. So whatever the myth is that I will live by, it will include that.
I like that.
I'm still putting mine together though.
Yeah, I think that we're making meaning. We have inherent meaning through natural processes, like I said, that help us survive. And I think that tooling that in a direction that's more progressive and good is good. I like the way you put your statement there. I mean, just everything that you described.
Yeah.
And who's Morningstar? They're saying I'm not. Morningstar is saying stuff. I don't know if you've been watching some of those.
What time is that? What time stamp is that? I can try to get to it by the time.
I'm looking at Morningstar says something about Islam or something. Help. They're speaking a lot of things, but like, like they're not asking a question when they could simply.
They've been having a conversation in the chat. Like they've been
well, they're mentioning MythVision a lot, and I figured they were addressing your platform of supposed atheism still won't address Islam. That's weird. They haven't been watching MythVision, I guess.
Right. I think you, Dillahunty, several other people have been engaging Islam a lot lately. I've been seeing it all over my feed. I guess it's what the algorithms don't show you because you haven't been looking for Islam content. So that person probably just hasn't seen what you've been doing.
Yeah, I don't think they've seen my Islamic stuff. And by the way, the reason I speak on Christianity is the same reason we would think we exist. Where do you come from? What was your experience? What do you have like to offer? I know Christianity better than I know any other religion out there. And so I start with what I know and what I deconverted from. But my investigation has absolutely been in Islam as well as Judaism and other things. So.
Okay. And y'all are seeing me learn this platform. This is my first live stream. So if I make something pop up on the screen that shouldn't be, I'm just learning. I'm just having fun playing around with some of these buttons here. I would like Derek's comment. This
and just while you're doing that, I want to say address Islam before you say that I lied. Islam is not true. The Quran is a man-made document. It has obviously been canonized very early on by Muslims, and their tradition has continued today. They have a lot of fundamentalist motivation to convert other people to their religion. I think it's just as false as Christianity and just as false as Judaism. I hope that addresses your point. But I investigated. I show mythology within the Quran, which to me shows, they're taking liberty to mimic earlier literature from the sleepers of Ephesus to Dual Qarnayn, which is Alexander the Great, to borrowing from Christian traditions of Jesus turning a clay bird into a living bird, which is not found in the canon, but it's in heresiological literature. And I think it's a man-made religion like any and every religion in the world. There's your address.
That was quite the soundbite. He came on and just...
I'm very honest. I tell Muslims and non-Muslims the same thing. It doesn't matter. Yeah. I don't know why this person keeps doing that other than they must be a Christian. So they're feeling very, you speak about something other than Christianity, man. It's hurting my feelings. That's the only thing I can think of.
One of my pod pals, Albert Kim, who's on the podcast with me, he says, Derek, what kinds of thinkers or writers do you find the most fascinating and or persuasive lately?
Lately, I'm weird. So it's like, it depends on what the topic is of the writer. I've mentioned this book earlier, as far as Hebrew Bible literature goes. It's very well written. I'm reading a bunch of different books right now. But I'm such a nerd. Like I'm into dissecting Islam, dissecting the Hebrew Bible, or dissecting biblical stuff, Christianity and things like that. So there are various scholars that I would recommend reading. I don't really know what to answer that because I'm actually diving into historical stuff. I'm not like reading inspirational writers or philosophical writers right now. It's specifically biblical or Islamic material that I'm focused on at the moment. So I don't know if you want me to just list off some stuff, or I could even send you a list of things. But if you're looking for reading recommendation books that I've read or am reading that I highly recommend, I have a link under every video that I do on MythVision, recommended books. You can click, and there's probably, I don't know, anywhere from 500 to 1,000 books, maybe more in there of books that are related to content that I'm into.
So I'm curious just to know, do you do anything for, I was always curious about this. I never got into self-help books. But I felt like I had the Bible, which was like the best self-help book for me as a Christian.
Mhm.
Since deconverting, my self-help is really, it really is self-help. I don't seek a lot of outside things to help me be a better me. I just try to engage in and enjoy relationships and be as fully human as I can. But what do you do for self-help, Derek?
I mean, the one thing I do, and I haven't read many self-help books, even though I've read a few books that go into some self-help stuff,
Mm,
is just try to help other people who are in a struggling situation, whether it be drug addiction. I'll put out content to try and help them and communicate through messages with people when they're struggling. They'll reach out. Also, when it comes to people who are struggling with trauma from a religion
mm,
standpoint, because I have a lot of people who reach out that are struggling with trauma. I try to hear them out. I listen to them and I
mm.
try to tell them my experience and encourage them. And that's the best way, I think, of helping yourself, is to help someone else. And literally, I learned this philosophy actually out of a 12-step program when I was in AA and NA.
Mm,
And it was simple, like help someone else, you'll be helping yourself. And that's where that mirror perception thing of
mm.
realizing, dude, it's us. It's really us. But that is
Yeah.
what helps me, is helping others. And then, yeah.
So I say this in, I think, one of the final chapters of my book. I was reading a book on uh, DNA and just the cellular process of breakdown and coming together. And this passage where the author was talking about when cells begin to give up their autonomy and come together to create something greater than the single cell.
Mhm.
And there was something in that moment as I was going through this research. I said, man, what if that's what we're really supposed to be doing? Like, what if the narrative or the myth that we should be chasing is something that recognizes self, but then says, self would be greater if it gave up that autonomy, not completely give, but and coming together with other selves to produce something greater. Instead of looking up, what if we looked within, looked down,
Yeah.
and learned lessons from our own construction? And I began to kind of take that into my mythos of what are we doing here?
There's a parable that I actually would tell, and you can go back to my recovery channel and see this,
Mm,
where I said, okay, this isn't written in any holy book, but here it is. So God goes to make man, and he's talking about how he's going to make man to himself, and Satan overhears it, and he
mm,
hears God say, I'm going to make man ambitious,
mm,
driven, intelligent, motivated, loving. I'm going to make him all sorts of these amazing attributes.
mm,
Satan hears it, and he realizes God's going to make man soon. So he's like, okay, I need to think about this. I need to find a way to hide God from man, so when man comes on the scene, he can't find him.
mm,
So I know what I'll do. I'll hide God in the mountains, beneath the rocks and the dirt. And then he thinks about it and goes, man will be intelligent, driven, motivated. He'll be ambitious, determined. He'll find a way to remove the rock and the dirt. He'll discover God. I can't hide God there because man will find him. You know what I'll do? I'll hide God beneath the oceans, beneath the seas, beneath the sand,
mm,
beneath the oceans. And they'll never find him there. And then he thinks about it and says, man's intelligent, man's ambitious, driven. He's going to find an apparatus that's going to help him
mm,
get beneath the water, sweep away the sand, and discover God. I can't hide God there. So then Satan thinks long and hard about where he's going to hide God. And then it just dawned on him, oh my gosh, I will
mm.
hide God inside of every single human that comes to exist. And they will always be looking for God outwardly, constantly
Mm,
searching and looking and trying to find God. But the whole time, it was them. Now, I end it with that
mm,
phraseology on purpose to make the point that it was you the whole
mm,
time. And it's like, we keep thinking of this external source, whatever. This is where panentheism and pantheism and all of these various isms, theisms that make sense of the world or try to. But at the end of the day, it helped me in my deconversion because I started to look inward. I stopped looking outward. I stopped assuming. Because remember now, this flesh, this body is just wicked and wretched and the lowest. That doesn't mean God's pneuma is not there, but any bad that happens, that's not the Spirit of God. It's the flesh that's in you. So you're at war with yourself the whole time. I put down the swords, metaphorically speaking. I stopped fighting myself and embraced myself. And when I embraced myself, you could then say technically, if you're a theist who believes in something mystical or something beyond, I then embraced God. And I know that's so heretical.
Yeah.
I know you pompous, egotistical, but when I embraced myself, I was able to embrace the world and the people around me in a way that you can't love your spouse and not know what love is. You can't. The way to do that is to love yourself. And in fact, I almost, when I was deconverting, interpreted the 10 commandments, the first 2 commandments this way. Love the Lord thy God with all your mind, your heart. Like all of these things are in us. And then it just skips and it goes, and love your neighbor as yourself. Now, notice something. Every little thing you need to love God with is in us. It's us. They're trying to say what is within us. And then it says, love your neighbor as yourself. Well, you can't. I just don't see the step of being able to love your neighbor if you're not loving within yourself. You are not loving and showing yourself the love that you deserve. How can you love your neighbor? So I start with that because it's all we can really. I mean, we talked about the existence thing. I can only come to that conclusion strongly that I know I exist. I assume you do. Let's go from there. And I may be reinterpreting that from its original context, but it helped me along my way. It's like, what if God is really this? It's just in our heads. It's what we like to think exists, but doesn't. And it's really our own narrative.
Yeah, I don't want to say anything that's going to muddy up that because there are people who, now you guys want to throw questions in the chat, right? We're pushing up on 3 hours. There are people who, like you said, Derek, they would look at what you just said and say, see, there it is, the blasphemy. There it is, the Genesis 3. You'll be like God. You want to be your own God. But I just simply ask you to think about this. Whoever would attack what Derek just said or try to question it. If you come to the conclusion that we have, that this supposed divine revelation cannot be what it was supposed to be. So it cannot be divine. And you get this idea that, okay, so then has God spoken? Where has God spoken? And then you start looking at other holy books and you start looking at the earth and you realize, oh, wait. And you come to the conclusion that, so we're alone. The heavens have been silent. And any words that have come from above have really come from below. They were put in God's mouth. If you come to that conclusion, the kind of things that we're talking about when I ask, okay, so then what will your myth be? What story will you come up with? What will you tell yourself to kind of help connect the dots of reality? That's all you really have if you come to the conclusion that the heavens have been silent. So you may think, oh, God has spoken to me. I know his word is hidden in my heart and all those things. Great. We don't have that conviction. As a matter of fact, we think that conviction is misled. And we would go to great lengths to demonstrate how it's misled. But at least give us the benefit of the doubt and say, well, dag, if they weren't convinced like I am, I could kind of see why they would think along those lines. You can call it arrogance or ego or whatever, but just remember, we don't have the conviction that you have. And we even question why you have. We once had it. We don't anymore. So this is where we are.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think you said it really well. The conviction, I was applying what I thought was true to the experience instead of realizing this is just a human experience and innate to all of us, including those who aren't Christian, including those who are atheist, including those who are agnostic, including those who are Hindu or Buddhist or whatever the religion is. We're all experiencing it, which told me when I started to make God bigger and God was the God of all religions, just kind of trying to reveal himself to people and people were trying to understand what God was. It eventually became, hold on, there's a common trope in human experience that humans have, which made me draw the line and realize maybe it's the humans that are actually projecting this stuff, and it's not the gods that, you know. I just want to say, someone mentioned Jeffrey Dahmer also embraced himself. Self becomes the standard in everyone's own bubble. But when we were talking earlier about ethics here, and we were talking about how we all don't want to suffer, we all think it'd be good to, you know, go with the what is the best for us, not bad. Jeffrey Dahmer, even in his own court, like in his own court case, admitted, I knew I was doing wrong. I was wrong. I should have. That's sick. I mean, so yeah, if someone's delusional with mental health issues like Jeffrey Dahmer had, and we don't know exactly what it was, but I can imagine there's an entire Bible length of, you know, what he's diagnosed with to do the things that he did. Yeah, I wouldn't put that in the same category, but this is why self and lining it with helping others is important, because if you're all isolated and self is all you got, you might be delusional about your conclusion. But we evolved as a social creature. And if you're not in line with the pack and you're the lone wolf who's doing something radically different, you need to evaluate that as well.
Yeah. Hey, somebody. Okay, they're talking to each other. All right, you guys are having a great convo in the chat. That's about to end because we're going to wrap this up. I just want to say, Derek, thank you. You've been gracious with your time and the convo. The like mind, the differences. There's no monolith. Christians are not a monolith. We know. Unbelievers are not a monolith. But human beings, we do have something in common, and this is a common experience that we're trying to work through. So thank you for everybody for joining the conversation. I will say to the Christian as well as to the non-Christian, journey well. Derek, I hope you get a chance to kick it again, man. I thank you so much just for the generosity that you've shown to me just starting out in this whole field.
Absolutely.
One last question. Any advice to a new YouTuber doing this?
Take
something you wish you would have known when you started out.
Yeah. Don't take comments too personal, especially ones that are coming at you or attacking. And if there is some constructive criticism, it's easy to be reactionary to some of it and not want to listen. But there might be something that you can learn from people, even if they are being dicks about it. There's some things that we can learn even from people we totally disagree with at the end of the day on other conclusions. And don't give up. Perseverance of the saints here. Hallelujah. No, but seriously, don't give up. Keep going and be true to yourself. Don't let others force your conclusions. Don't get baited into an emotional response. Create content that is authentic to yourself as you're investigating this through your own critical faculties and learning. Don't get duped in because you have audience that believes in something, and you might draw that conclusion now, but later say, hey, I disagree on this. Draw your own conclusions and don't let that sway you to draw those conclusions, because the pressure will be there as a content creator. But you're just going to be true to yourself, and that's ultimate.
Wow. Good stuff, man. Good stuff. Thank you, everybody who tuned in. We had about a consistent 60 people watching while people are commuting and on their way home from work and all that kind of stuff. Everybody who's going to watch later is here for you guys. Like, subscribe, comment. I would have loved to hear some Christians talk about the dilemma of subscribing to a channel like this. It's dialogue. I know you fighting like, man, can I like this? It's dialogue. But much love, everybody. I'll catch you guys next time.
Thank you.